Hello, and welcome to Brada Tales. Tonight, we're bringing you a selection of eerie stories paired with the soothing sound of rain to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before diving into the atmosphere of suspense, leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is. If these stories send chills down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get comfortable, let the fear gradually envelop you, and tell us what kind of stories you'd like to hear next time. Settle in, we're about to begin. The Unseen Force in Iowa. I came to Iowa to escape. The noise of city life, the suffocating weight of unanswered questions, everything had become too much. After losing my job, a failed relationship, and a string of regrets I couldn't shake, I needed a change. The decision was simple. I needed space, quiet, and distance from everything. My uncle's farm, tucked away in the rolling fields of Iowa, seemed like the perfect place to get lost for a while. The drive up to the farm was long, the road stretching endlessly under an overcast sky. Fields of corn and soybean unfurled on either side of me like a green sea, broken only by the occasional barn or farmhouse. The air was thick with the smell of earth and hay, and the peace I thought I'd find here felt almost suffocating. When I arrived, the house looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits, worn but sturdy, its white paint peeling in some places, the windows slightly fogged by age. My uncle, tall and weathered, stood on the porch watching me approach, his face unreadable. He gave a quick nod, his way of saying welcome, before handing me the keys to the guest room without a word. I didn't expect much from this visit, just some time away to gather my thoughts. It was strange how easy it was to slip into the silence of this place. No one to talk to, nothing to distract me. Yet, as the evening sky darkened and I unpacked my things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The house was quiet, too quiet. The only sounds came from the occasional creak of the old wood, the whistling wind outside, and the rustling of leaves from the trees that surrounded the farm. It was peaceful, yes, but also strangely oppressive. The sort of quiet that filled the air with an unspoken weight. I thought nothing of it at first. It's just the isolation, I convinced myself. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world outside grew even darker, I started to feel something else in the air, something more unsettling. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened to the sounds of the house settling, the faint wind howling through cracks in the window. And then, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it. A faint, scraping sound. It was soft at first, like a branch dragging across a window pane, but it was different, more deliberate, more rhythmic. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the house or maybe an animal outside. But when it came again, louder this time, a knot of unease tightened in my chest. It was coming from the barn. The first night, I barely noticed it. It was a faint, almost imperceptible noise, scratching, followed by a soft sighing sound, like wind slipping through cracks in a door. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. The old beams creaked in the cool night air, and the wind always had a way of making strange noises around here. But the sound stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind as I tried to sleep. The next night, I heard it again. At first, it was barely audible, just a slight rustle, a faint scraping, like something being dragged across the floor. Then came the sighing sound, long and drawn out, as if someone or something was breathing heavily, deep and tired. I pulled the covers over my head, convincing myself it was nothing. The house was old, full of creaks and groans. It wasn't unusual for old buildings to make odd noises at night. I rolled over and tried to sleep. But by the third night, the sound had changed. It wasn't just the creaks of the house settling or the wind slipping through the cracks anymore. The noise had grown more distinct, more deliberate. I could hear it clearly now, the scraping of something hard against wood, the slow, agonizing sigh that followed, like a breath being taken after a long struggle. It was coming from the barn. I tried to reason with myself. It's probably just an animal, I thought. A raccoon, a stray cat, something simple. But the sound, the way it came and went, didn't sit right with me. It wasn't random or natural. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm that felt intentional. And the sighing sound, it wasn't the wind. It was deeper, almost like a voice trying to escape. I told myself I was overthinking things. After all, I had come to this place to find peace, to escape from the chaos of my past. I didn't need to start imagining things that weren't there. Still, that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something in the air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And so I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft scrape and sighing coming from the direction of the barn, until eventually the sounds faded into the night. I closed my eyes, determined to ignore it. It had to be nothing. Just the house settling. Just the wind. But the next night, it came again. Louder. Clearer. The scratching. The sighing. The unmistakable feeling that something or someone was out there waiting. The sounds kept coming, night after night. Each time, the scratching and sighing grew clearer, closer. It was as if the barn, in the dark hours of the night, was trying to reach out to me. At first, I tried to dismiss it, to reason that it was just my imagination. But after the fourth night, when the scraping seemed almost frantic, I could no longer ignore it. I couldn't sleep anymore, not with the thought of whatever was in that barn gnawing at the edges of my mind. It wasn't fear that pushed me to investigate, it was curiosity. But underneath that curiosity, there was something darker, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I knew it was foolish, that I should just leave it alone. Yet, I found myself lying awake, listening to the rhythmic sound, my mind racing with questions. What was causing it? Why did it happen every night? And why did it feel like it was calling to me? Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to know. I grabbed my flashlight, its cold metal body reassuring in my palm. I stood at the foot of the stairs, my heart thudding in my chest, the faint sound of the scraping still in the distance, pulling me towards it. The house was eerily still, everything felt too quiet, too silent, as if even the wind had stopped. The only thing moving was my breath, shallow and quick. I padded quietly down the creaky stairs, trying not to wake my uncle, whose deep snores drifted from the other end of the house. The kitchen was dark, save for the weak glow of the refrigerator light, and the back door to the barn stood ahead of me, just beyond the kitchen, where the soft glow of the moonlight filtered through the cracked panes of glass. I hesitated. The barn was far enough from the house that no one would hear me if anything went wrong. The thought of going out there alone made my stomach churn, but there was something I couldn't shake, something pulling me, pushing me toward the unknown. It's probably just an animal, I told myself, though the doubt was creeping in. You'll just check it out, then go back to bed. But as I reached for the door, the noise came again. This time, the scrape was louder, sharper, like nails dragged across the wood of the barn door. It was a warning. My hand froze on the doorknob. For a moment, I almost turned back. But curiosity, the kind that gnaws at you and doesn't let go, overcame me. I stepped out into the cool night, the flashlight shaking in my grip, the beam of light flickering as I moved toward the barn. With every step, the air seemed to grow colder, denser, as if the land itself was closing in around me. The barn stood ahead, its outline dark against the night sky. I could barely make out the details, but there it was, silent, waiting. I couldn't explain it, but as I stood there, staring at the barn, I felt an odd sense of anticipation, as if something was about to happen. Something I didn't understand. The scratching was louder now, more insistent. I could feel it vibrating through the ground, like it was coming from beneath my feet. I didn't hesitate anymore. I lifted the flashlight and aimed it at the barn door, my fingers trembling with a mix of unease and determination. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I knew one thing for certain: I had to know. The mystery had to be unraveled. And so, with one deep breath, I pushed the door open. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open, and the scent of old hay and mildew immediately filled the air. It was strange how the barn could be so silent, so still, after the noise that had kept me awake for nights on end. I held my flashlight in front of me, the narrow beam cutting through the thick darkness. My footsteps echoed loudly in the cavernous space, the sound unnaturally loud against the deep quiet. I stepped inside, my boots scraping against the dusty floor. The air felt cooler here, the kind of chill that makes you shiver, but not from the cold, more from the sense that something unseen is watching you. The light from my flashlight danced across old farming tools, hay bales stacked high, and the scattered remnants of forgotten projects. But there was no sign of anything unusual. Just an empty barn, I told myself, trying to shake off the growing unease. The noises had stopped the moment I stepped inside. The faint scraping, the sighing breaths, they were gone, leaving only the unsettling stillness. I swung the flashlight around, scanning every corner of the barn, my eyes searching for anything out of place. There was nothing. No sign of an animal, no loose boards, no hidden secrets. I took a deep breath, letting the light wander over the dusty beams overhead. The barn was just a barn, I thought. It was an old building. There were bound to be sounds, odd shifts and creaks as the wind moved through it. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was missing. The barn seemed to close in around me, as though it were watching me, breathing with me. The air felt thick, like the very walls were pressing in, and I couldn't help but feel a heaviness in my chest, a sense of being trapped. I stepped deeper into the barn, the flashlight illuminating old tools and farming equipment, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, I saw it. A shadow. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the dim light in the corner of the barn, but as I approached, I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. It was something else. The shadow seemed to move just slightly, just enough to catch my eye. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, staring at the dark shape, trying to make sense of it. There was nothing there. Or, at least, nothing I could see clearly. But the feeling in the air was undeniable. Something was wrong. The weight of it pressed down on me, like a hand on my chest, choking the air from my lungs. The scratching started again. This time, it wasn't distant. It was closer. But it wasn't coming from anywhere in particular. It felt like it was coming from the very walls of the barn itself, as though the barn itself were alive. I turned quickly, flashing the beam of the flashlight in every direction, but there was nothing. Just the empty barn, the shadowy corners, and the thick, oppressive air. My breath quickened. The light flickered as if responding to my rising panic. I stepped back toward the door, my body tense, ready to flee. But the noise, soft, deliberate, came again, this time louder, as though it were following me, surrounding me. I could feel my pulse racing in my neck, the hair on the back of my neck standing up, but I couldn't tear myself away from the darkness that had settled in the corners of the barn. I wasn't alone here. I had to leave. But when I turned to run back to the door, the feeling of something in the barn, the oppressive presence, the suffocating air, became unbearable. I was being watched. I was being followed, though there was no one there. I forced myself to take another step. And then the light flickered again. And in that flicker, I thought I saw something, a shape, just out of the corner of my eye. A figure, pale and indistinct, standing motionless in the shadow of the barn. I turned, but it was gone. The scratching stopped. The sighing stopped. But the presence remained. It lingered, just behind my shoulder, just out of sight. I couldn't stay any longer. I rushed for the door, my breath ragged, and stumbled outside, slamming the barn door shut behind me. The cold night air hit me like a shock, and I took deep breaths, trying to calm the racing panic in my chest. But as I stood there, in the dark yard, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out. That whatever was in that barn was now with me, waiting, watching. The barn was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the peaceful stillness I had hoped for, but something far more suffocating. The heavy weight of that oppressive presence still clung to the air around me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. My mind raced with what I had just experienced, the shadow, the sense of being watched, the coldness that had followed me out into the night. As I stood there in the yard, still trying to calm my nerves, a thought struck me. There had been something off about that barn. Something I had missed. I had checked every corner, but I hadn't explored the entire space. It was that lingering feeling, something unfinished, like I hadn't uncovered all that the barn held. The idea gnawed at me, even though every instinct screamed for me to leave it alone. I couldn't. I grabbed the flashlight again and made my way back to the barn, each step heavier than the last. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees as if urging me to turn back. But I pushed forward, opening the creaky barn door with a shudder of reluctance. Inside, everything was the same as before, quiet, dark, filled with shadows. But this time, I moved with more purpose, searching with a sense of desperation. My eyes traced every corner, every crack in the walls. I ran my hand along the wooden beams, feeling for any irregularities. Then, I found it. At the far end of the barn, partially hidden behind a stack of old hay bales, was something I hadn't noticed before, a narrow, almost imperceptible seam in the wall. It was tucked away so carefully that I could have sworn it wasn't there earlier. My breath caught as I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight revealing a door half concealed behind the hay. It was small, almost too small to be a real door. The wood was aged, its surface worn and cracked, as though it hadn't been touched in years, maybe decades. But there it was, plain as day, standing before me in the dim light. There was no handle, no visible lock, just a rough-hewn frame. I reached out, my hand trembling as I brushed the door with my fingertips. It felt oddly cold, like a draft had been seeping through the cracks for years. My heartbeat quickened. This had to be it, the source of the strange presence, the place I had missed when I first searched the barn. I swallowed hard and, with one final glance at the empty barn around me, pulled at the door. It creaked open with an agonizing slowness, as if it hadn't been moved in a lifetime. A gust of cold air rushed past me, making my skin break out in goosebumps. The smell of damp earth and decaying wood flooded my senses, thick and foul. It wasn't the familiar scent of hay and farm life, It was something older, darker. I stepped into the small space beyond the door, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air here was colder, colder than anything I had ever felt. It was a biting cold that seemed to seep into my bones, draining the warmth from my body. I could feel my breath turning to fog in the freezing air. My heart pounded harder, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. There was something else in this room, something beyond the physical cold. A presence. Something unseen, but palpable, pressing down on me with an almost suffocating force. I took a few cautious steps forward, the floor beneath me creaking with each movement. As I did, a wave of dread washed over me. It wasn't just the cold. It was the overwhelming sense that something was waiting for me here. Something that I was not supposed to find. I felt a sudden pressure on my chest, like invisible hands were pushing against me. The walls of the room seemed to close in, and I staggered back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My mind raced. I needed to leave. I needed to get out. But my feet refused to move. Something held me there, rooted to the spot, as though the air itself was thick with invisible chains. And then, from the deepest corner of the room, I heard it. A whisper. It was low, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The words weren't clear, but they felt like they were spoken directly into my mind, like a cold breath against my ear. Leave, now. The chill deepened, and I could feel the shadows pressing closer, as though the darkness itself was alive, suffocating me with its weight. I forced myself to take a step back, but my legs felt heavy, like they were trapped in place. The door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang. I whirled around, heart racing, but found myself staring at the now closed door. It was sealed, as if it had never been opened. The room, no, the space itself, felt alive now, vibrating with a presence I couldn't explain. I wanted to scream, to run, but the air had thickened around me, making it nearly impossible to move. Whatever was in that room, whatever was waiting in the cold shadows, was not something I was meant to find. But I had. And now, there was no turning back. I couldn't sleep. I hadn't been able to since the night before. Each time I closed my eyes, all I could see was that door. The coldness. The whispers. The pressure in that small, hidden room at the back of the barn. And the thing that terrified me the most was the feeling that something was waiting for me there. Something I couldn't escape, no matter how far I ran. But I couldn't ignore it. The sound was back. That scraping, that sighing, more distinct now, more insistent. It wasn't just the barn anymore, it was in my head, echoing through the stillness of the night, wrapping itself around me. The more I tried to push it away, the louder it became. I kept telling myself that I should leave. I should just pack my things and go, find some other place to escape to. But my feet wouldn't move. I knew I had to return. I had to know what was in that barn, what was waiting behind that door. The thought gnawed at me, growing more urgent with each passing minute. By the time I heard the first scraping sound from the barn, I was already standing at the kitchen door, my hand frozen on the knob. The cold air outside seemed to press against me, inviting me into the night, beckoning me toward whatever darkness awaited. I opened the door slowly, as if not wanting to disturb the night. The familiar scent of the land greeted me, but there was something else, something darker in the air. It wasn't just the usual stillness of a farm in the middle of nowhere. It was a heaviness, a tension in the atmosphere, like the air itself was holding its breath. The moon hung high above, casting long, ghostly shadows across the yard. I knew where I was headed. I didn't need the flashlight this time. I knew the path too well. The barn stood in the distance, dark and silent, yet alive in its own way. The closer I got, the stronger the sound became. Scratching, sighing. It was like the barn itself was breathing. Every step I took felt like I was getting closer to something that wasn't supposed to be found, but was now drawing me in like a magnet. I reached the barn door and hesitated. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled with fear, but I couldn't turn away. I didn't want to. The door groaned as I pushed it open, the familiar scent of mildew and dust washing over me. But tonight, the barn felt different. It wasn't the same old place I had wandered through before. This time, there was a sense of malice in the air, a feeling that the barn itself was awake, aware of my presence. The lights of the flashlight flickered and danced across the wooden beams as I stepped inside. The air was colder than I remembered, colder than anything I had felt before. My breath hung in the air, fogging the beam of light, but the cold wasn't just from the temperature. It was deeper than that, like it was coming from the very walls, from something ancient and alive. And then, there it was. The door. The door that I had found the night before. The one that had led to that suffocating room, the room that had filled me with so much dread. The thought of it made my stomach twist, but I couldn't stop myself. My feet moved toward it without my permission, as if they knew the way. I stood before it again, flashlight shaking in my hand. The door was just as I had left it, closed, hidden behind the hay bales, as though it had never been opened at all. But I knew better. I knew it was there, just waiting for me. My breath hitched. I wanted to turn back, to leave, to run and never look back. But the sound, the scraping, the sighing had only grown louder, more desperate, pulling me forward. I couldn't resist it. I reached for the door handle again, my fingers trembling, and pulled. It creaked open slowly, the coldness pouring out like a rush of icy air. The foul, damp smell of the room hit me instantly, the air heavy and oppressive. It felt like a weight on my chest, and I had to fight to take a breath. But as I stepped inside, I realized something was different this time. It wasn't just cold. It wasn't just dark. The room felt wrong. Like it was alive, not in a natural way, but in a way that twisted the very essence of what a room should be. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they were breathing along with me. The floor beneath my feet was damp, slick with something that didn't belong in a barn. And then I heard it again, the whisper. Louder this time, clearer. Leave, before it's too late. I froze, the words cutting through me like ice. The door slammed shut behind me with a sudden force, sending a shock through my body. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but the room was empty. No figure. No shadow. Just the oppressive silence. But I could still hear it. That scraping, that sighing. It was coming from inside my mind now, like it was scratching against the very core of my thoughts. The darkness was all around me, pressing in, suffocating me. And in the center of the room, something was waiting. Something I couldn't see, but I could feel it, its presence, watching me. The air thickened, heavy with malevolence, and I felt a cold hand grip my heart. I had to leave. But the door wouldn't open. I tugged at the handle again and again, but it was stuck, as though it was refusing to let me go. The cold grew colder, the darkness deeper. I felt the walls pressing in, closer, closer, until the air was gone, and I couldn't breathe. It was too late. And then, from the darkness, a voice. You should have left. The light of my flashlight flickered once more and went out. The barn was no longer silent. It was alive. I don't know how long I stood there in that suffocating darkness, unable to breathe, unable to move. The world around me felt wrong. Every inch of that barn, every crack in the wood seemed alive with a sinister energy, pulling at me, tugging at my very soul. I shook my head, trying to clear the haze that had descended upon my mind. My heart hammered in my chest, my hands slick with sweat, but I forced myself to take a step back, my eyes locked on the door that refused to open. Then I heard it. A sound so soft, yet so clear that it cut through the oppressive silence. A soft scraping, like nails dragging across the wooden floor. I spun around, the flashlight flicking in every direction, but saw nothing. The barn was empty, except for me, of course. But it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of something ancient, something that had been waiting for me. The scraping continued, louder now, moving toward me as if it had a mind of its own. I could feel the air grow heavier, thick with the weight of something unseen. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned, searching for the source. And then, I saw it. A pitchfork, left carelessly on the floor near the hay bales, moved. Just a little at first, one of its metal prongs dragging ever so slightly against the floor. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The pitchfork scraped again, dragging a little further, and then, without warning, lifted itself off the ground. It hovered there for a moment, suspended in midair, and then dropped with a clatter, landing on the floor with a deafening crash. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. My mind screamed in disbelief. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it was. The barn around me was no longer just a barn. The walls, once comforting and familiar, now seemed to shift and ripple in the dim light, like something was moving behind them, something I couldn't see. The shadows in the corners of the room twisted, bending in unnatural ways, stretching and shrinking as if they had a life of their own. I tried to move, but the air had thickened, pressing down on me like 1,000 invisible hands. It was harder to breathe, harder to think. My legs felt like lead as I took another step forward, desperate to find the door, to get out. But the barn had changed. It was no longer a place of refuge, it had become a prison. I turned to face the corner by the loft, where a long-abandoned chair sat in the shadows. I had noticed it before, but hadn't thought much of it. Now, though, it seemed to be waiting. Suddenly, with a sudden creak of old wood, the chair rocked forward. Slowly at first, almost lazily, as if being pushed by an unseen hand. And then it picked up speed, rocking faster and faster, until it was slamming against the floor with loud, jarring thuds. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the panic rising in my chest. I had to get out. I had to get away from this place. But as I turned toward the door again, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, something in the doorway. A shadow. It was long, stretched out across the floor, dark and shifting in a way that shouldn't be possible. The light from my flashlight flickered, and for a moment it looked like the shadow had eyes, watching me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and the room seemed to grow colder, impossibly cold. The shadow moved then, gliding across the floor in my direction, its form bending and twisting as it grew longer, like it was searching for me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the spot, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The shadows seemed to close in, surrounding me, their forms more distinct now, long, twisted limbs that seemed to move with purpose, as though they were coming for me. I turned my flashlight toward them, and in that instant, the shadows disappeared, just vanished, as if they had never been there at all. But the air remained thick, heavy with an unseen presence that clung to me. I could feel it now. Something was watching me. Something that wasn't human. Something far older and far more dangerous. The scraping noise returned, louder now, coming from every direction. I spun around, the light flicking from side to side, but there was nothing to see. Yet I could feel it, a constant pressure, like the barn itself was alive, closing in on me. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud from above me. The loft. Something had moved up there. I knew it. Without thinking, I ran toward the stairs, my feet stumbling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But as I reached the top step, I stopped dead. There, on the edge of the loft, was something I couldn't explain, a figure. A figure standing still in the darkness, facing away from me, its shape indistinct, but its presence undeniable. I reached for my flashlight, but the beam of light flickered and died, plunging me into pitch black. And that's when I heard it again. A whisper, low and guttural, but unmistakable. "You're not alone." The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing in tighter until the darkness swallowed everything. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The barn had changed. And whatever was inside it, whatever was lurking in the shadows, wasn't going to let me leave. I couldn't escape it. The sound, the feeling, the weight of it pressing down on me, wrapping itself around my thoughts, my very sanity. I told myself it was all in my head, paranoia, exhaustion, the isolation. But deep down, I knew. I knew that the barn, the darkness, the force inside, it wasn't just something I could reason away. Something had changed. Something had marked me, and I couldn't rid myself of it. The noise had started out as just a scraping, a subtle sound that could be brushed aside, a mere disturbance in the stillness of the night. But now it had become something else. Something invasive. It wasn't just coming from the barn anymore. No, it was inside me now. I could hear it when I closed my eyes, when I tried to think. It was in my skull, rattling around, scratching at my mind like claws on wood. Everywhere I went, it followed me. The sound, the voice. It's not real. It's not real. I repeated the words to myself, trying to make sense of it, but it was no use. The more I tried to deny it, the more insistent it became. The barn, had it always been like this? Or had I just never noticed? The walls, the beams, they looked different now. They weren't just old, withered wood. They seemed to pulse with something deeper. Alive. I could almost feel the barn watching me. It was like it had become a part of me, wrapped around my mind and my thoughts, twisting everything I saw into something dark, something strange. I was losing track of time. I didn't know how many days had passed since I first entered that barn. It felt like weeks, like months. But outside, the world remained the same, quiet, empty. Each night, I would hear it again. Scratching, sighing, whispering. I had stopped going back to the barn. I was too afraid to face it, to see what lay behind that door. But it didn't matter. It came to me now, every night, at the same time. I would lie in bed, my body frozen in fear, and the sounds would start. At first, it was faint, distant. But it would grow louder, closer, until I could feel it in my bones, in my head. It's just the wind, I told myself. Just the house settling. But I knew it wasn't. The house didn't settle like this. The barn didn't make noises like this. And what was worse, what terrified me more than anything, was the thought that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the barn at all. Maybe it was me. Maybe I had brought it with me. The darkness. The thing that lurked behind that door had found me, and now it was inside me. I started to question everything. I'd look in the mirror, and I wouldn't recognize the person staring back at me. The eyes, hollow and dark. The face, gaunt, as though something was slowly draining the life from me. My own reflection felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone lost. The sound was worse now. It wasn't just the barn anymore. No, it was everywhere. I could hear it in my mind, scratching at the corners of my thoughts. Leave, the voice whispered. Leave, before it's too late. It was hard to tell where the sound ended and my thoughts began. Was I imagining it? Was I losing my mind? Or was the barn somehow inside me now, its influence growing, poisoning everything I saw? I'd hear it tapping at the window, scraping at the door, and I'd think, no, it's just the wind. It's just the trees. But then I'd look, and there was nothing. Nothing but the emptiness. Sometimes I hear my own voice whispering to me, low and soft, echoing in the back of my mind, urging me to go back to the barn. To open that door. To face whatever was waiting there. But when I looked around, the barn was nowhere to be seen. It was like it had disappeared altogether, leaving only that deep, oppressive silence behind. I tried to leave. I tried to get in my truck and drive. But the moment I'd start down the long dirt road, I'd feel the pressure in my chest, the cold grip around my heart. My hands would shake on the wheel, and I'd feel like I couldn't breathe. Like I was suffocating. I couldn't get away. The barn was always with me. It's not real. I repeated the words, but they felt hollow now. Empty. One night, I woke up gasping for air, my heart thundering in my chest. The room was pitch dark, but I could still hear it. The sound. It was louder now, almost deafening. Scratching. Sighing. And this time, it wasn't outside. It was inside. It was inside my mind. The walls around me seemed to shift. The ceiling, the floor, everything moving, changing, warping. I could feel it pressing in on me, pulling me down into the blackness. The air was thick with something I couldn't describe. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, something primal. The air itself was alive, full of malice and dread. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling in the dark. I reached for the door, my fingers fumbling, desperate to escape. But before I could open it, the sound stopped. And then I heard it. You're still here. I froze, my hand on the doorknob, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The voice was clear now. Not in my mind, but in the room. I turned around slowly, my body numb with terror. The shadow was there again. Only this time, it wasn't in the corner. It was right in front of me. Right there in the room, watching me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, as if in response to my fear, the shadow took a step forward. And that's when I realized. The darkness was already inside me. The days seemed to blur into one long stretch of oppressive silence. I was no longer sure what time it was, or even which day it was. The rhythm of the world outside felt distant, like I was living in a different reality altogether. Every moment that passed was another moment spent inside my own head, trapped in this feeling that something was slipping away from me. The barn. The door. The thing I had felt, no, seen, lurking in the shadows. I had tried to ignore it, to push it to the back of my mind, but it was impossible. The pull was undeniable. Like a magnet, it tugged at me, and the more I fought it, the stronger it became. I could hear it every night now, the sound, faint and distant at first, then growing louder with each passing hour. It was like a voice calling to me, beckoning me to return. I knew it wasn't real, not in any conventional sense. But it felt real, too real. I had to confront it. I knew that now. I had to face whatever was in that barn. But there was a part of me that resisted, a part of me that wanted nothing more than to turn around and never look back. The very thought of stepping foot in that barn again, of walking through that door into the unknown, filled me with a dread that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just fear, it was terror. Something that clawed at the very core of my being, making my legs tremble and my stomach twist in knots. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The barn was calling me. That voice, it wasn't just a sound. It felt like a presence, like something that knew me, that had been waiting for me. It wasn't going to let me go. Each night, the same struggle played out in my mind. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Should I go? Should I just leave this place, forget the whole thing? Or should I finally face whatever it was that waited for me in the dark? Every part of me screamed to run, to get in my truck and drive until I couldn't hear the scratching anymore, until I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. I could go anywhere but here. The world outside felt so normal, so distant from the horrors I felt in that barn. But there was another part of me, a part one couldn't ignore, that told me I had no choice. That voice, that feeling, it was getting louder. The darkness wasn't going to leave me alone. It was already inside me. I couldn't run anymore. But what if I wasn't ready? What if I wasn't strong enough? What if whatever was waiting for me in that barn, whatever was pulling me toward it, was too much for me to handle? I didn't know the answer. I spent hours walking the farm, trying to clear my head, trying to focus on anything other than that damn barn. The house, the fields, the distant hills, all of it felt so far away, so insignificant now. It was as if the barn had become the center of my world, its pull growing stronger with every minute that passed. I would stand by the window, watching the barn in the distance, feeling the weight of it pressing on me. And then, in the dead of night, I would hear it again. A faint scratching, just on the edge of hearing. The sighing. The whispers. Always the whispers. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, I realized I had stopped fighting. I was drawn to it now. Drawn to the unknown, to the fear, to the thing that was waiting for me. I had to know what it was. I had to understand what was happening, even if it meant losing myself in the process. But the fear, the dread, it still lingered. It was there in every breath, in every step I took toward the barn. The closer I got, the heavier my heart became, as if it was trying to hold me back, to warn me. I was losing myself in this. I could feel it, deep inside, that small voice that had once told me to leave, to escape, now growing quieter. It was almost as though I was becoming the thing in the barn, as if it had already taken root in my soul. But I couldn't stop. When I finally stood before the barn, I knew. I knew that the answer wasn't going to be found in running away. The answer was inside, behind that door. Whatever it was, whatever was waiting for me, I had to face it. It wasn't the barn anymore. It was me. and I wasn't sure which part of me was the monster. I took a step forward, my legs trembling beneath me, and I reached for the door. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking into the unknown. I felt like I was walking towards something I had always known. Something familiar. Something that had always been inside me. I couldn't remember how long I had been standing there, just outside the barn, staring at the door, my hand frozen on the handle. The air was thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. The scratching, the whispers, everything had led me to this moment. But now that I was here, now that I was standing at the threshold, it was as though something inside me was rebelling. There was a strange sense of stillness in the air, a feeling that pressed against my chest, as though the very atmosphere was holding its breath. The barn loomed before me, dark and silent, but something was different. Something had changed. There was no longer a faint whisper of wind or the usual rustling of the trees. The silence was absolute, suffocating. I stepped inside, the creaking of the door cutting through the heavy air, and immediately the weight of the place pressed down on me. The familiar smell of hay and old wood was absent. Instead, there was something bitter in the air, something sharp that made my throat close up. It felt like the barn was holding its breath too, as though it were alive, watching, waiting. The flashlight in my hand shook as I moved deeper into the barn, casting long shadows across the wooden beams. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing louder in my ears. I told myself I was imagining things. That this was nothing more than my fear, my growing obsession with the sound, clouding my mind. But even as I tried to convince myself, I could feel it, the presence. The thing that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting. I could see it now, in the farthest corner of the barn, just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. A movement. Something dark, shifting quickly in and out of view. I froze, my blood turning to ice. My breath caught in my throat, as though the air had been ripped from my lungs. It's just a shadow. Just the wind, I whispered to myself, but the words felt weak. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't natural. It wasn't just a trick of the light. No. I stepped forward, every inch of my body screaming at me to turn around, to leave, but my legs moved on their own. The flashlight flickered as I moved toward the corner where I had seen the movement, my pulse racing faster with each step. The barn felt colder now, the temperature dropping in a way that didn't make sense. The cold wasn't from the outside, from the night air. It was something that emanated from within, something that chilled my very bones. And then I saw it. For just a fraction of a second, the light caught something in the corner, something that wasn't quite a shadow but wasn't entirely solid either. A figure, crouched low to the ground, its limbs twisted unnaturally, its shape distorted and wrong. It was the size of a person, but the proportions were off. Too long, too thin, its body stretched in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Its face, if it even had one, was hidden in darkness, but there was something about its presence that felt so wrong. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The flashlight fell from my hand, its beam dancing across the barn's walls as it clattered to the floor. The barn was no longer silent. It hummed with something, a presence, something that pulsed in time with my frantic heartbeat. The movement in the corner stopped. But I could feel it, feel the eyes, the watching, the waiting. Something was wrong here. Something was beyond my comprehension. This was no longer just a sound in the dark, a whisper in the night. This was something alive, something ancient, something malevolent. And it was aware of me. It knew I was here. I scrambled to my feet, my hands trembling, my mind racing. I had to get out. I had to leave. But as I turned toward the door, I heard it again. That scraping, that low sighing sound. Only now, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was all around me, pressing in from all sides, filling the air with a cold, suffocating weight. The barn was alive. The thing in the corner wasn't the source of the sound. It wasn't the thing that was making the noises. No, it was something else, something deeper. Something that had been in the barn long before I ever stepped foot in this place. I had come for answers, but I had only found a question I didn't want to ask. As I turned to run, I saw it again, just a flash, a glimpse of the figure moving with unnatural speed, its eyes, or what should have been eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness. I didn't stop running until I was safely outside, the barn door slamming shut behind me with a final, ominous thud. But I knew that the barn would always be there, waiting, and that I would never truly be free. The nights had become unbearable. Every evening, I found myself listening, waiting for the inevitable, the sounds from the barn. But now, they weren't just faint whispers in the dark, barely perceptible, like they had been before. No. This time, the sounds were more aggressive, more insistent. It started with the scratching again, but now it was louder, scraping against wood, dragging like something heavy was being moved across the floor of the barn. It was followed by a deep, drawn-out sigh, as though something in the barn was trying to inhale the very life out of the air. My heart would race as I lay in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, every muscle tense with fear. But this night, it was different. The whispers began. At first, I thought they were a figment of my imagination, the lingering echoes of the fear that had already taken root inside me. But the whispers grew clearer with each passing moment, drifting from the barn like a cold, thin thread of sound winding its way into the room. I couldn't make out the words at first, but I could feel the urgency in them. The voices were speaking to each other, low and rasping, as if they were in the same room with me. Then, just as I was about to convince myself that it was just the wind, I heard something else. Laughter. It was faint, like the sound of a child giggling, but hollow. Hollow and wrong. It echoed through the barn, sharp and grating, like nails scraping against a chalkboard. It was soft at first, as though coming from a distance, but it grew louder, closer, until I could feel it rattling inside my chest, vibrating through my bones. I shot up from my bed, my heart hammering in my throat. The room was dark, but I could feel the oppressive weight of the silence pressing against me, pushing me into the corner. I could still hear the laughter, the whispering voices mixing with the low growl of the wind outside, the barn calling me with an urgency that I couldn't ignore. I had no choice. I had to go. The door creaked as I stepped out into the cold night, the familiar farmhouse fading behind me. My breath fogged in the air, sharp and quick, but it did little to calm the panic that clawed at my insides. I was already halfway to the barn before I even realized I was moving, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the dead silence of the night. The barn was a silhouette in the distance, its shadow stretching long across the field. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I drew closer, the laughter growing louder with each step, its edges becoming sharper. It was no longer the sound of a child, it was something darker, deeper, like the laughter of something that wasn't quite human. Something ancient, something that had no place here. The barn door was ajar. I didn't remember leaving it that way. My pulse quickened as I walked toward it, my hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight in my pocket. The whispers were louder now. I couldn't understand them, but the urgency in the tone was unmistakable. They were calling me. I pushed the door open with a groan of protest, the wood scraping against its frame as though it, too, was reluctant to open. I stepped inside. Immediately, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath, thick and misty in the air. The barn was silent now, all at once. The laughter had stopped, and the whispers had faded into nothing. But the silence was worse. The absence of sound pressed against my eardrums, suffocating. I felt it again, the presence. It was different now, more pronounced, like the barn itself was alive with something unseen. It was watching me. I moved slowly through the darkness, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows. The barn looked different now, distorted, as if the very walls had shifted in my absence. My heart pounded in my chest, the thumping sound loud in my ears as I strained to listen for any sign of life. And then, I saw it. In the corner of the barn, near the old hayloft, there was movement. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I saw it again, a figure, dark and shifting, like it was made of shadow, only it wasn't a shadow at all. The shape was too solid, too real. It was crouched. Low to the ground, its long, spindly limbs twitching unnaturally, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. It was staring at me, or rather, through me, its presence so oppressive that it felt like the very air around me was thickening. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring at the figure, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my chest tightening with fear. And then it moved, slowly at first, dragging itself across the floor toward me. Its body contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible, its limbs twisting at odd angles as it inched closer. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The flashlight in my hand flickered, casting wild shadows across the walls, but I couldn't look away. I felt the cold, wet air brushing against my skin as it crawled closer, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it stopped. The barn fell silent again, the figure retreating into the darkness, leaving only the sound of my racing heartbeat. The whispers returned, softer now, almost a lullaby, and I knew, without a doubt, that whatever was in this barn was not of this world. I wasn't alone. And now, it knew I was here. The next few nights were filled with a dread that gnawed at my insides, a constant presence that followed me everywhere I went. Even when I wasn't near the barn, I could feel it, the eyes. The sense that something, or someone, was always watching. It was as though the very air around me was charged with an unseen force, something that breathed and shifted just out of my reach. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't the usual feeling of unease that came with being alone in a quiet place. This was different. This wasn't just my imagination running wild, it was something real. I could feel the gaze, sharp and unblinking, following my every move. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, an overactive response to the fear that had settled deep in my bones. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew, each passing hour, until I couldn't shake it, couldn't escape it. Even during the day, when the sun was out and everything seemed normal, I felt the pressure on the back of my neck. When I turned, there was nothing there. Nothing visible. But I knew something was there. It wasn't just in the barn. No, the sense of being watched followed me throughout the farm. I'd be working in the fields, my hands digging into the rich Iowa soil, but there it was, an ever-present sensation of being observed. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up, my heart would race, and I'd have to force myself to focus on the task at hand, to ignore the creeping, uncomfortable feeling that something was standing just behind me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then, one evening, it happened again. I had been in the barn, alone, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The sound of the scratching had been quieter, almost as if it were fading, but I knew better. It was just biding its time. As I moved deeper into the barn, the same oppressive silence wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. I could feel it then, the presence. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the air, like the temperature had dropped by a few degrees. But the feeling grew quickly, like the walls themselves were closing in. It was as if the barn was pressing in on me from all sides, the beams above groaning in protest, the air thick with something ancient, something wrong. I stopped in my tracks, my breath coming faster as I looked around. There was nothing. No figures, no movement. But the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I turned in a slow circle, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath quick and shallow. My eyes darted from one shadow to the next, searching for anything that might explain this sense of intrusion. But the barn was still, silent. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. The whispers had returned, faint, just beyond my hearing. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were talking about me, about my fear, about my thoughts. They were inside my head, outside my head. It didn't matter anymore. The barn, the air, everything was alive with it. I slowly backed toward the door, unwilling to take my eyes off the shadows that seemed to shift just out of the reach of my flashlight. Every part of me screamed to run, but my legs felt heavy, like they were bound by invisible chains. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a footstep, soft but deliberate, right behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, flashlight jerking wildly through the dark. Nothing. But I knew. I could feel it, the weight of something just behind me. The air around me seemed to warp, thickening, pressing down on my chest. I was suffocating. I had to get out. I turned and ran, pushing through the door and out into the open air. But as I stood there, gasping for breath, the feeling didn't leave me. I wasn't alone. I was never alone. And no matter how far I went, no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape the presence that watched me from the dark corners of the barn. It had followed me. The barn wasn't just a place anymore. It was a prison. A prison with eyes. Eyes that would never stop watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me, lurking in the dark, but the need to know the truth pushed me forward. The barn, once a place I thought I understood, had become an enigma, each night revealing a new layer of terror, something more sinister than I could have ever imagined. But tonight I felt compelled to face it head on. The whispers had returned, low and ominous, weaving through the air like a sinister melody. I couldn't make sense of the words, but the tone was unmistakable, a warning, perhaps, or a taunt. The barn seemed to be alive, breathing with me, the stale air thick and suffocating, pressing in from every side. I took a shaky breath and forced myself inside, flashlight trembling in my hand. The shadows stretched long and dark across the barn floor, deepening with each step I took. The dim light flickered uneasily as I walked further in, scanning the corners, the loft, the beams above, half expecting to see something, or someone, move. I wasn't sure anymore if I was looking for something tangible or if my mind had become so warped by fear that I was only imagining the threats. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure. At first, I thought it was just my nurse playing tricks on me, but as I turned my head toward it, the unmistakable shape of a dark silhouette became clearer. There, standing in the far corner of the barn, was a figure, tall and unmoving, its shape unnaturally still, like it was waiting for me. The longer I stared at it, the more it felt like it was watching me, studying me, its presence cold and oppressive. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound deafening in my ears. The figure was there, real, and yet it didn't belong. It wasn't a person, at least not in the way I understood people. The shadows around it seemed to warp, stretching unnaturally, as if the figure itself was somehow absorbing the light, bending the very fabric of space around it. It didn't have a face, not that I could see, but I could feel its eyes on me, and that was enough. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a mere insect caught in its gaze. I wanted to turn and run, to leave the barn and never return. But something, compulsion, perhaps, with a strange need for answers, kept me rooted to the spot. Slowly, carefully, I took a step forward, my flashlight shaking in my hand, casting erratic beams of light that flickered across the floor. The figure didn't move. It was as if it was waiting for me to approach. I stepped closer, and then, in an instant, the figure disappeared. It wasn't like it moved. No. It was as though the shadows themselves swallowed it whole. One moment, the figure was standing there, as solid as anything in this world, and the next, it was gone, vanished into the oppressive darkness of the barn. My heart skipped a beat as I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the sudden emptiness. I swung the flashlight back and forth, desperately searching the corners, the rafters, the walls, but there was nothing. No figure. No movement. Just the relentless whispering, now louder, more insistent, swirling in my head like a bad dream. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay still, to focus. I scanned the barn again, this time with more urgency. The beams overhead creaked in the silence, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Every shadow seemed to twitch with movement, but I couldn't catch it. And then, as I turned my head to the far corner once again, I felt it. A cold draft. Not from the open door, but from within the barn itself. The shadows in that corner were darker than before, deeper. The air around them felt unnaturally still, as though time itself had stopped. I didn't know what was happening, what I had seen, or not seen, but I knew one thing for certain, that figure had been real. It had been standing there, watching me, and it was not gone. It was somewhere, waiting, and it would not be ignored. My pulse raced. I stepped back toward the door, my eyes never leaving that corner. I couldn't look away. The shadows there seemed to pulse now, like a living thing, drawing me in. I had to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I was paralyzed. All I could do was stand there, eyes fixed on the corner, waiting for the figure to reappear, waiting for whatever came next. But nothing happened. The barn stood silent once more, the eerie whispers fading back into the walls. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. But I knew that what I had felt was more than just fear. The barn, the shadows, the figure, they were all connected. Something was there, something that had been waiting for me. And now, it knew I was here. And I didn't think it was going to let me leave. The next few days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that the barn was becoming a part of me, entwining itself in my thoughts, in my every waking moment. The whispers that had filled the air were now like a constant hum in the back of my mind, just loud enough to keep me on edge, but not enough to make sense of them. I tried to ignore it, to move past it. But the farm, the barn, was no longer just a place. It was alive with something I couldn't understand, something I was starting to fear. I could feel it, the weight of it, pressing down on me. The air in the house felt thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Even during the day, when the sun was high in the sky and everything seemed normal, I couldn't escape it. My every step felt like it was being watched, as if I were walking through a dream, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. It started with the lights. At first, I thought it was a malfunction, something wrong with the old wiring in the house, but I soon realized it was something more. The lights would flicker, just for a moment, like the power was being cut off and restored. It would happen while I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to gather my thoughts, or while I was walking from one room to the next. A flicker here, a flash there. Just enough to make me doubt myself. I would blink and find the room still dark, the shadows hanging long across the floor, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't the kind of flicker that comes from a faulty light bulb. It felt purposeful, almost as if something was trying to hide itself from me. Every time I looked directly at the light, it would stay steady, but when I turned away, when I wasn't watching, it would flicker again, like it was mocking me. Then came the shapes. Strange, shifting forms in the corners of my vision. At first, I thought they were just my imagination. A trick of the light, a play of shadows. But they became more frequent. I would catch a glimpse of something moving in the corner of a room, a dark figure shifting just out of reach of my sight, and when I turned to look, there was nothing there. But the sensation of something being there remained. It was as though the shadows themselves were stretching and twisting, eager to take shape, to become real. And it wasn't just in the barn anymore. No, it followed me everywhere, through the fields, across the yard, even in the house. I would see fleeting glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting across a window, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. But when I would turn to face it, it was always gone. Always just out of reach, just far enough that I couldn't quite grasp what it was, but knew deep down that it was there. It was like I was losing touch with reality. My mind was playing tricks on me, or so I tried to tell myself. But every time I caught a glimpse of one of those shifting shapes, that sense of being watched would return, stronger, more urgent. It wasn't just in my mind. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Something was out there. And it was getting closer. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront it, to face whatever it was that was haunting me, whatever was twisting my perception of reality. I grabbed the flashlight and headed out to the barn once again, driven by a mix of fear and a desperate need for answers. As I approached the door, I noticed the lights in the barn flickering. At first, I thought it was the same issue as in the house, but then the power cut out completely, leaving me in total darkness. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, echoing in the stillness. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to turn back, but my feet carried me forward, one step at a time, into the deep blackness of the barn. The air was colder than usual, a biting chill that seemed to crawl under my skin. I flicked the flashlight on, its beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the familiar surroundings. The wooden beams, the stacks of hay, the tools hanging from the walls, all were as they had been. But something was wrong. As I walked further into the barn, I saw it again. A shadow. No, not a shadow, something else, something that didn't belong. The shape was flickering in the corner of my vision, like it was being woven into the fabric of the barn itself. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the barn, empty and silent. But the feeling was overwhelming. The presence was here, with me. The walls felt like they were closing in. The shadows were alive now, moving, twisting, pulling at the edges of my vision. I stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The whispers returned, louder this time, almost like voices, faint, indistinct, but undeniable. The words were too soft to understand, but the tone. It was mocking, taunting. The sound seemed to swirl around me, pulling at the very edges of my mind. Suddenly, the barn lights flickered back on, bright and harsh, illuminating the barn in stark, unnatural light. I blinked against the brightness, but when I looked around, there was nothing. No shapes, no shadows, just the ordinary barn. Yet I knew something had changed. Something was inside me now, shifting, warping reality itself. It had followed me, it was watching me, and I had no idea how to stop it. I stumbled back toward the door, my heart pounding, but the presence, whatever it was, remained. Even in the light, I could feel it. It was everywhere. And I was losing myself, one moment at a time. The days that followed were a blur, each one more unbearable than the last. I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, to stick to some semblance of normality, but my body was betraying me. I could no longer pretend that what I had been experiencing was just in my head. The fear was no longer an abstract feeling, something I could ignore or push aside. It was real, and it was manifesting physically, in ways I couldn't control. It started small, just a twitch in my hand here, a tremor in my voice there. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. The moment I stepped foot inside the house, I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the cracks in the walls, felt like it was pushing me deeper into a pit I couldn't escape. It was in my hands first. I would reach for a glass of water, and the tremors would start. At first, I thought it was just nerves, that maybe I hadn't gotten enough sleep. But it didn't stop. My hands would shake uncontrollably, a constant reminder of the terror building inside me. Even when I tried to steady myself, they wouldn't listen. I could feel my heart hammering, my pulse quickening, each beat a drum of panic in my chest. Then came the cold sweats. It didn't matter if I was inside or outside, day or night. The moisture would cling to my skin, soaking my shirt through, even in the dead of winter when the air was biting cold. I would wipe my face, but it would return, thick and clammy, as though my body was betraying me, reacting to some invisible force I couldn't fight. My clothes stuck to me, the dampness clinging to my back, my neck, my arms. No matter how much I wiped, no matter how much I tried to dry off, the sweat wouldn't stop. It was as if the fear had become a part of me, seeping through my pores. But the worst of it, the thing I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried, was the feeling in my chest. My heart would race, faster and faster, as if it were trying to escape from my rib cage. Sometimes it felt like it was going to burst, the pressure so great that it was hard to breathe. Each time I tried to steady myself, to calm my thoughts, it only got worse. I would place my hand over my chest, feeling the frantic beat of my heart, and tell myself it was just stress. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just stress, it was fear. Fear that had taken hold of me, twisting itself around my body, tightening like a vice. I couldn't sleep. At least not properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the whispers. Every time I drifted off, I would wake with a start, gasping for air as though something was choking me. The darkness in my room felt alive, as though it were watching, waiting, and I couldn't escape it. I could hear the sounds from the barn, scratching, whispering, laughing, echoing in my mind, and each night they seemed closer. I would lie awake, my body stiff, my eyes wide open, the bed feeling like a trap I couldn't escape from. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. That the barn, the shadows, the whispers, they were just figments of my imagination. But my body wasn't lying. My body was telling me the truth. Something was out there. Something was in the barn. Something was inside me. Each time I stepped outside, the air would feel heavier. The wind would bite at my skin as if it were alive, reaching out to pull me back into the barn. The field would stretch out before me, but I would feel the urge to turn around, to go back to the house, to stay away from the barn. But I couldn't. I needed to know what was happening. I had to face it. But every time I thought about the barn, about the shadows I had seen, I felt my breath quicken, my pulse race. My throat would dry, and the sweat would return, soaking my clothes, making me feel weak, helpless. I was breaking. There was no denying it now. The fear had me in its grip, and it wasn't going to let go. Every moment felt like a battle just to stay present, to hold on to some semblance of myself. My mind was unraveling, piece by piece, and I couldn't stop it. I looked at my reflection one morning, the lines under my eyes deepening, my skin pale, my face gaunt from lack of sleep. The person looking back at me wasn't the same man who had arrived at the farm just a few weeks ago. That man was gone. In his place was someone hollow, someone broken. And I knew it wasn't just the farm doing this. It was the barn. Whatever was in there, whatever had started all of this, it was getting closer. And it wasn't just tormenting me from the shadows anymore. It was getting under my skin, crawling into my mind, my body, my soul. I couldn't take much more of this. The nightmares came for me every night without fail, slipping into my mind the moment I closed my eyes. I couldn't escape them, no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't just a single nightmare, but a never-ending loop, each dream worse than the last, each one pulling me deeper into a world where reality and terror twisted together into a suffocating web. The barn was always the centerpiece of my dreams. I would find myself standing outside it, the door creaking open on its own, beckoning me to step inside. But I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place, as if the ground had turned to stone beneath my feet. The sky overhead would darken, the sun vanishing behind thick clouds that seemed to swallow all light. The barn itself would loom in front of me, larger, more oppressive than in real life. The air would grow thick with a suffocating cold, the kind that claws at your bones, and I would hear the whispers, faint at first, like the rustle of dry leaves, but soon growing louder, closer, until they were almost deafening. I would step forward, forced against my will, my body moving like a puppet on strings. As I walked toward the barn, the whispers would shift into words, low and mocking, as though they were speaking directly into my ear. "Come closer," they would hiss. "You can't escape." When I finally entered the barn, it was always the same. The inside was darker, colder, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, writhing in the corners like living things. The barn no longer felt like a place, it felt like a creature, breathing and waiting, alive with a terrible hunger. The tools that once hung innocuously on the walls now seemed to twist and distort, their forms alien and grotesque, like they were being pulled into shapes they were never meant to take. And then I would see it, the figure. At first, it was a shape in the darkness, just a fleeting silhouette in the farthest corner of the barn. But as I approached, it would become clearer. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its form skeletal and twisted, its face hidden in the folds of a tattered, black cloak. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed a faint, unnatural red, and they would fixate on me with a hunger that sent waves of terror crashing through my chest. The whispers would turn into laughter, mocking, cruel, as the figure slowly moved toward me. "You shouldn't have come back," it would say, its voice a raspy whisper that made my blood run cold. "Now, you belong to me." I would try to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs wouldn't move. I would be trapped, frozen in place, as the figure drew closer, its presence filling the entire barn, its darkness smothering every inch of light. I could feel its icy breath against my skin, its hands reaching for me, cold as death itself. But just as it was about to touch me, to pull me into its suffocating grasp, I would wake up. I would sit up in bed, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest as if I had just run a marathon. My body was soaked in sweat, the sheets clinging to me, my skin clammy and cold. I would look around the room, the shadows pressing in from every corner, and I would realize I was still trapped. The nightmare hadn't ended. It had only followed me into the waking world. Each time I woke from these dreams, the fear would stay with me, lingering long after the remnants of the dream had faded. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my breath shallow and quick, unable to fall back asleep. The darkness of the night felt like a living, breathing thing, and I could hear the faintest whispering in the back of my mind, urging me to return to the barn. I tried everything I could think of to escape the dreams, drinking myself to sleep, taking long walks in the fields to tire my body, even sleeping with the lights on, but nothing worked. The nightmares would return, night after night, each one more vivid, more terrifying, until I could no longer distinguish them from reality. The dreams were becoming a part of me. The lines between what was real and what was nightmare were blurring. I could feel the figure. It was in my head, in my mind, following me, calling to me, dragging me deeper into its world. And the more I tried to fight it, the stronger it became. One night, I woke up not from a nightmare, but from something worse. I woke up with the feeling that the barn wasn't just in my dreams anymore. I felt the coldness in the room. I heard the whispers, faint but unmistakable, as if they were coming from just outside the door. My heart raced, my skin crawled. The barn was waiting. And somehow, I knew it was no longer just a dream. It was real. I wasn't just being haunted by the barn. The barn had begun to haunt me in my waking life. And there was no escape. Every night, the barn's call became more insistent, as though it had taken on a life of its own. The whispers, once faint and distant, now felt like they were pressing against my ears, close enough to make my skin crawl. It was as if the barn itself were breathing, waiting for me to return. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, to shut the fear out, something inside me, something dark, kept pulling me back. I couldn't explain it. Logically, I knew I should stay as far away from that place as possible, but there was something about it, something I couldn't shake. Every time I tried to force myself to go back to sleep, the barn loomed in my mind, a shadow stretching across my thoughts, until I could no longer ignore it. I could feel it calling to me, an invisible thread tethering me to its dark heart. I would find myself standing by the door at night, my hand hovering over the knob, as though my body had already made the decision before my mind could process it. I tried to fight it, tried to lock myself in my room and bury my face in my pillow, but it never worked. The pull of the barn was too strong. I couldn't escape it. I would give in. The door would creak open, and I would step outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The barn would be waiting, its silhouette a black mass against the starless sky, like a monstrous shadow looming in the distance. As I walked toward it, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, echoing in my head, urging me on. I didn't know what I expected to find, or if I even expected anything at all. The closer I got, the more the air thickened, like it was wrapping itself around me, pulling at my lungs. The barn felt alive, hungry, its presence pressing in from all sides. It felt as though it were reaching out to me, pulling me into its darkness with a force I couldn't resist. Inside, the barn had become something else entirely. It wasn't just a barn anymore, it was a gateway, a threshold between the living and the dead. The shadows inside seemed to move on their own, slithering across the walls like 1,000 insects, each one searching for a way to consume me. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my feet and the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my chest. But it was the presence I felt in the air, the thick, heavy weight of it, that kept me frozen in place. I could sense it, lurking just beyond the edge of the darkness, waiting for me to venture too far. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it wanted something from me. Every step I took deeper into the barn felt like a step towards some unknown fate, one I could not avoid. I told myself I was just imagining it, that I was just losing my mind, a product of my own fears and the isolation of the farm. But deep down, I knew the truth. The barn wasn't just a place. It was something alive, something ancient that had been waiting for me to cross its threshold. Each night, it grew stronger. Each time I returned, I could feel it feeding on my fear, growing more powerful, more insistent. And with every visit, I felt myself weakening, my resolve crumbling under the weight of it. My thoughts grew more muddled, my senses more distorted. The barn seemed to stretch and shift, its walls closing in on me, as if it were trying to swallow me whole. I began to notice things that weren't there before. The shadows no longer felt like just shadows. They had shape, they had form. I would see flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye, figures darting between the wooden beams, too fast to be real. And sometimes, if I stared long enough, I could almost make out faces, twisted, contorted faces, staring at me with eyes filled with malice. It wasn't just the barn that was changing. It was me, too. I could feel myself unraveling. The fear was becoming all-consuming, like a poison running through my veins, slowly eroding my sanity. But no matter how much I tried to turn away, the barn's pull would grow stronger, more insistent, until I was powerless against it. I had to know what it wanted, what it was, why I couldn't stop coming back. But every time I asked myself these questions, I could feel the answers slipping further away, as if the barn itself were hiding them from me, making me forget just long enough to lure me in again. It was a game, and I was its pawn. A pawn I couldn't escape from. And I was beginning to fear that the barn wasn't just calling me to explore it anymore. It was calling me to stay. It started small, little things that could be easily explained away. A wrench missing from the tool shed. A pair of work boots that weren't where I'd left them. But then, it grew. The disappearances became more frequent, more unsettling. My personal items, the things I rely on, vanished without a trace. At first, I told myself I was just losing my mind. I'd mislaid things, forgotten where I'd put them. But there was no way to explain the growing list of missing items, a jacket that had been hanging on the back of a chair, a flashlight I'd left on the kitchen counter, even the spare keys to the barn that I always kept in my coat pocket. Everything seemed to just vanish. I searched everywhere, under the bed, through the drawers, behind the walls, but they were gone, as though they had never existed at all. It wasn't just the farm tools or the personal things I used day to day. One afternoon, I went to grab a bottle of water from the fridge, only to find it had been replaced by something else. Not a bottle of water, no, it was an old, cracked jar of something I didn't even recognize. And there was something inside it, something dark, swirling, almost alive. I didn't know how it got there, but as soon as I touched the jar, I felt a cold rush run up my spine, like a silent warning. I dropped it. The jar shattered on the floor, but when I looked back, it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. I began questioning my own mind. Was I imagining it all? Was the isolation taking its toll, warping my perception of reality? I tried to reason with myself, tried to chalk it up to stress or exhaustion. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The worst came one evening when I returned to the farmhouse after a long day working in the fields. I walked inside, expecting to settle in for a quiet evening, but when I reached the kitchen, I froze. The door to the pantry was wide open. I could see that the shelves had been stripped bare, no food, no canned goods, no jars of preserves. Everything was gone, as if someone had come in and taken it all. There was no sign of forced entry, no explanation. I stood there, staring at the empty shelves, trying to make sense of it. My heart pounded in my chest. My mind raced, scrambling for any rational explanation. But there was none. I went from room to room, searching desperately for something, anything, that would suggest this was all just a bad dream or some mistake. But the house was empty. Empty of the things I had left behind, empty of logic, and empty of reason. As the days passed, the disappearances grew more intense. The barn, which I had been avoiding with increasing dread, seemed to draw closer to the heart of it all. I found tools that had been missing for days, suddenly reappearing in places they had no business being, on the kitchen table, on the porch, or in the middle of the yard. It was as if the barn was somehow pulling them back, as if the items were being reclaimed. There were moments, brief flashes, when I thought I saw someone out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving just out of view, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. And sometimes, when I would go out to the barn, I could feel an icy presence standing behind me, close enough that I could almost hear its breath, but when I spun around, nothing was there. Nothing but the oppressive, choking silence that seemed to fill the space, pressing in from all sides. It was as if the barn wasn't just taking things, it was taking me, too. My reality, my grip on it, was slipping. Day by day, I felt myself being erased, like the barn was slowly unraveling everything I knew, leaving only the shadow of what had once been. The strangest part, though, was that no one else seemed to notice. There was no sign of anyone coming in to take the things, no sign of a struggle. And when I mentioned it to my uncle, he only shrugged and muttered something about the farm being old, the house settling, the wind playing tricks on the mind. He was used to things going missing in the past, he said. It was just part of living out here, where the land and the house held their own secrets. But I could feel it, the presence. It was growing stronger with each passing day, weaving its way deeper into the fabric of this place. The barn wasn't just a source of fear anymore. It was the source of my disintegration. And with each thing that vanished, with each piece of my life that was erased, I felt like I was being drawn to it, to whatever was waiting there, like an insect to a flame. I wasn't just losing my things, I was losing myself. The question wasn't just what was happening to my possessions. It was, what was happening to me? And I was beginning to fear that the barn was more than just a place. It was becoming a world, a place where the boundaries of reality were beginning to crack, where time and space and existence itself were being rewritten, piece by piece. And I was right in the middle of it, unable to escape its pull. Each night, the barn seemed to grow bolder, as if the darkness within it was no longer content with mere whispers and shadows. The force that had once hidden itself in the corners of my mind now began to make its presence known more clearly, more violently. I could no longer tell where the line between reality and fear blurred. Every time I entered the barn, it felt like the walls themselves were watching me, alive with a malevolent force, waiting for me to break. The shadowy figures began to materialize more often. They weren't just shapes anymore, they were beings, tall, shifting figures that flickered at the edge of my vision, just out of reach. I'd catch them for a moment, standing motionless in the darkness, and then they vanish, leaving only a cold breeze in their wake. But sometimes, just before they disappeared, I could hear their movement, a slow, deliberate drag of feet, like something, was pacing just out of my line of sight. I'd spin around in a panic, flashlight trembling in my hand, but every time I looked, the barn was empty. The shadows were still, the silence deafening. And yet, the feeling of being watched, of being followed, never left me. It clung to me like a second skin, wrapping itself around my neck, tightening with every step I took deeper into the barn. The whispers were louder now, too. They seemed to echo from every corner, from beneath the floorboards, from above the rafters. I could never understand the words, only their tone. Low, guttural murmurs that would rise to a whisper just as I tried to catch them, like a cruel game being played at my expense. Sometimes, the whispers would change, becoming fragmented, as if different voices were speaking at once, layering over each other in a dissonant chorus of agony. The air would grow thick with their presence, suffocating me, making it impossible to breathe or think clearly. But the worst part was what happened when I wasn't looking. When I wasn't paying attention, I could feel the barn shift around me. It wasn't just the movement of air or the creaking of old wood. It was something much worse, intentional. A deliberate change. Like the barn was adapting to my every move, learning me, studying me, and waiting. It was as though the shadows themselves had become aware of me, and with each passing night, they grew bolder. I would close my eyes for a split second, feeling a sense of wrongness creep over me. And then I'd open them again to see the shadows shifting, slowly, in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Figures emerging from the walls, gliding across the floor in unnatural, jerky movements, always staying just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. It was on one of these nights, when I felt the familiar shiver crawl up my spine, that I really saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the barn, cloaked in darkness, its form indistinct but unmistakably there. The outline was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that stretched too far, bending at angles. It was impossible to tell if it was human. There was no face, just a massive shadow, with tendrils of darkness that seemed to reach out and sway in the air like smoke. I could feel its eyes on me, though I could not see them, but it could see me. That much was clear. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering. The barn seemed to close in on me, the air thickening, suffocating. The whispers intensified, becoming shrill and frantic, like they were urging me to stay, to come closer. But every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. I turned, my feet stumbling over the uneven floor, desperately trying to find the door. But the barn felt endless, like the exit was always out of reach, just beyond my grasp. I heard it then, footsteps, slow and deliberate, following behind me. The sound was unmistakable, the rhythm of a step too heavy to be my own. I dared not look back. The darkness was no longer just a backdrop to my fear, it was alive. The barn had become my nightmare. Every time I dared step foot inside, the air seemed to grow colder, the space darker. The feeling of being followed wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real. It was as if the darkness itself had taken root in the barn, and it was now haunting me. The further I went, the more I felt the weight of it pressing in, as if every shadow, every whisper, every movement was part of some grand design to draw me in, to consume me piece by piece. I tried to leave again that night, tried to tear myself away from the pull of the barn, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if it had sealed itself shut, trapping me inside. The shadows circled closer, and I could hear the whispers, clearer now, louder. They were no longer just background noise. They were speaking to me, calling me by name, pulling me into the very heart of the barn. I pressed my hands against the door, my breath ragged and frantic, and the shadows seemed to sway in response, almost alive. It felt like a trap, and I was the prey. The barn wasn't just a place. It was a cage. A cage that was closing in around me with every step I took. And I had no idea how much longer I could hold on to my sanity before it consumed me completely. The realization came slowly, like the creeping chill of a winter's night, insidiously wrapping itself around my thoughts until I could no longer deny it. It was subtle at first, small inklings, strange shifts in perception that I convinced myself were just the side effects of exhaustion. But now, after weeks of torment, the truth was impossible to ignore. The force in the barn wasn't just haunting me. It wasn't just trying to scare me or make me feel uncomfortable. No, it wanted me. It had been feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each encounter, each sleepless night, each breathless moment of dread. I began to understand that the barn wasn't just a place I was drawn to, it was a place that was drawing me in. And with every step I took inside, I was giving it exactly what it wanted. It wasn't until I saw it, really saw it, that I understood. The figure that had stalked me in the shadows, the movement that had felt like it was always right behind me, the whispers that clung to my every thought, they weren't just random occurrences. They were deliberate. The force inside the barn was like a predator, carefully toying with its prey. It had been pushing me, testing my limits, playing on my fears, until I was nothing more than a trembling, hollow shell. One night, as I stood in the barn, trying to steady my racing heart, I felt it again, the presence. It wasn't the same as before. It was different. This time, I could feel it coiling around me, like an invisible hand wrapping around my throat, tightening with each breath. The air was thick with something far worse than the oppressive silence. It was anticipation. I felt it, the force growing stronger with each passing second. And then I heard it. A low, guttural voice that came not from the darkness, but from within me, as if it was speaking directly into my mind. Come closer. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a sound. It was an invitation, a command that I couldn't resist. My legs moved before I could stop them, drawing me toward the center of the barn, where the shadows seemed to pull and twist, as though the very ground was alive. The figure appeared again, but this time it wasn't just a shadow. It was there, towering over me, the edges of its form flickering in and out of existence, like it was both real and not. There was no face, no eyes, but I could feel its gaze upon me, burning into me from every direction. It had been patient, I realized. It had been waiting, drawing me in bit by bit until there was nothing left of me but terror and compliance. The whispers came again, louder this time, almost frantic, swirling around me like a storm. I couldn't tell if they were the voices of the barn or my own thoughts, but they urged me, coaxed me into submission. It's time, the voice inside my head murmured. Time to give yourself to me. I tried to fight it. I tried to move, to turn away, but my body refused to obey. My muscles were frozen, locked in place by the overwhelming pressure of whatever was holding me here. I was powerless, trapped by my own fear, sinking deeper into the grip of the force that had been feeding on it. It was as if the barn itself had taken root inside my mind, growing stronger with every flicker of panic. I understood now. The barn was a conduit, a prison built not just from wood and stone, but from fear. It wasn't interested in my things, my belongings, my tools. It was after me. It wanted my fear, my pain. It wanted me to give myself over to it willingly, to let the terror consume me so completely that I would become a part of it, a part of the darkness. The shadows around me grew darker, denser, pressing in from all sides. I felt the weight of them on my chest, on my throat, as though they were trying to smother me, to drag me into the depths of whatever hell this barn had become. My heart pounded painfully in my chest, and the air around me seemed to grow colder, thicker, until I could barely breathe. It was then that I realized the true horror. The force in the barn didn't just want to haunt me, it wanted to consume me. It wanted to turn my fear into fuel, to twist it until it had nothing left of me but a hollow shell, a body without a soul. It had been feeding on my terror, growing stronger with each encounter, until it was ready to take me completely. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but the words died in my throat, choked off by the suffocating presence of the darkness. There was no escape. There was no way out. The barn had become my prison, and I had become its prey. I couldn't remember how much time had passed. It felt like an eternity, an endless loop of fear and darkness, with no hope of escape. The whispers became louder, more insistent, urging me closer to whatever was waiting in the heart of the barn, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the force, by the overwhelming weight of the darkness pressing in on me from every side. And in that moment, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. The barn wasn't just haunting me. It was feeding on me. And I had no idea how much longer I could keep giving it what it wanted before I was consumed entirely. I had always prided myself on my independence. I had come to the farm to escape the noise of the world, to find peace and quiet, to find myself again after everything had fallen apart. But now, I felt as though I was losing something far more precious, my very grip on reality. I avoided everyone. I had to. I couldn't face anyone. The thought of speaking to another person, of explaining what was happening to me, seemed impossible. How could I describe the nightmares that came in the dead of night? How could I tell anyone about the whispers, the shadows that followed me, or the cold, suffocating presence that lurked in the barn? It sounded insane. No one would believe me. Worse, I feared they would try to drag me away from the barn, from the only place that seemed to understand the pull inside me. I hadn't spoken to my uncle in days. He had noticed, of course, my absence at meals, my refusal to join him in the fields, the way I locked myself in the house when he was nearby. But I had no energy to explain myself, no strength to pretend that everything was fine. I was tired, more than I'd ever been before. The exhaustion had settled deep into my bones, but it wasn't the kind that came from hard work or lack of sleep. No, this exhaustion felt psychic, like my mind itself was being worn thin, stretched to the breaking point. Every day, I'd wake up with the sensation that I hadn't slept at all. My thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind, impossible to catch or keep hold of for long. The days had begun to bleed together, each one indistinguishable from the last. And with each passing hour, the weight of the barn grew heavier on my mind, a constant presence that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, pulling me deeper into itself. I would pace the house, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. The silence was maddening. It pressed in on me from all sides, until every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside felt like a harbinger of something more sinister. I couldn't stay inside, not for long. The barn called to me, even when I tried to ignore it. The pull was irresistible, like a magnetic force that tugged at my chest, pulling me towards the darkness that awaited. But each time I went out there, I felt as though I was losing more of myself. The barn was no longer just a building. It had become something else entirely, something alive, something that knew me, that fed off my fear. The air around it was thick with a sense of doom, as if the very ground beneath it was stained with the weight of the past. And yet, each time I stepped inside, I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't stop my legs from carrying me toward the shadows, toward the unseen force that waited for me. I knew I was losing touch with everything I had known. I couldn't trust my thoughts anymore. The line between what was real and what was imagined had begun to blur. I would look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back at me. My eyes were hollow, bloodshot. My face was gaunt, pale, like the reflection of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. I had stopped eating regularly. There were moments when I didn't even notice my hunger until it became a sharp, desperate ache in my stomach. But even then, I didn't care. I didn't have the energy to cook, to find something to eat. All I could focus on was the barn. It consumed me. Every waking moment, every breath I took was filled with the thought of it, the oppressive darkness, the whispers that still echoed in my mind. Sometimes, I would hear it even when I wasn't near the barn. It wasn't loud at first, just a faint whisper at the edge of my consciousness, like the sound of wind through trees. But then it would grow, and the whispers would form words. They were never clear, never distinct, but they felt real. Come to me. It's waiting. You belong to me. I couldn't shake them. I couldn't push them away. They followed me like a shadow, seeping into my dreams, into my waking thoughts. At times, I would find myself walking towards the barn without meaning to. My body would act on its own, dragging me through the fields, through the brush, until I found myself standing in front of the door, staring at the place that had become my prison. It was impossible to explain. I was terrified of it, and yet I was also drawn to it. The force inside the barn was not just haunting me, it was consuming me, erasing my sense of self, replacing it with something darker, something hungry. Each step I took toward it, I felt a part of me slip away. But it didn't matter. I couldn't stop. I began to lose track of time. The days felt like endless nights. The clock on the wall no longer seemed to matter. My uncle's voice, when he did speak to me, sounded distant, muffled, as though he were a part of a different world, one that I no longer belonged to. There were moments when I would snap out of it, moments when I would look around and realize I hadn't seen the sun in days, or that I had wandered aimlessly in the barn for hours without even realizing. The isolation was complete. And then, one day, it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The barn was calling to me. I could feel its pull like never before, and I knew that if I didn't go to it now, if I didn't surrender to it, I might never escape. I had never been a superstitious person. Growing up, I had always laughed at the idea of ghosts and spirits, dismissing them as stories meant to scare children. But now, standing in front of the barn in the dead of night, I couldn't deny what was happening. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, something deeper than the winter chill that had begun to grip the land. It was a cold that came from the inside, from the very core of the barn itself. And in that moment, something in my mind finally clicked. The barn wasn't just a haunted building. It wasn't just a place where strange noises came from, or where shadows seemed to have a life of their own. No, the barn was a gateway. A portal. A tear in the fabric of reality itself, allowing something dark, something other, to seep through from beyond. I had always assumed that the noises, the presence, the overwhelming dread were simply the result of some malevolent force haunting the barn. But what if it wasn't a haunting at all? What if it was something more? What if the barn had always been more than just a place for storing hay and tools? What if it had always been a conduit, a passageway for the forces that lurked in the spaces between worlds? I couldn't stop thinking about the way the shadows twisted in that place, how they moved, not like normal shadows, but like something alive. How the air felt thick and suffocating, like it was charged with electricity. How the whispers always seemed to come from the very walls, from the very foundation of the barn, as if it were alive, pulsing with dark energy. Everything in the barn, the coldness, the shifting shapes, the ever-present feeling of being watched, pointed to the same horrifying truth: the barn was more than a place of terror. It was a bridge, a threshold where something ancient and unnatural could cross into the physical world. I had noticed it before, but never truly understood. The way the barn seemed to resist the daylight, how its dark presence grew more intense with each passing night. I had thought it was merely a product of my fear, a trick of the mind, but now, standing in front of it, I knew it was something far worse. It was a rift, a hole in the world. A place where reality thinned, where the rules of nature bent and broke. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how long it had been there, how long it had waited. The barn had always been old, even when I first arrived. But now, it felt as though it had been standing for centuries, maybe even longer, silently waiting for the right moment. Waiting for someone to find it, to step into it, to feed it. I couldn't tell you how I knew, but I knew the barn wasn't just drawing me in, it had been waiting for me. I had been its prey all along, unknowingly drawn here by the same force that had haunted me since the first night. It had guided me here, slowly pulling me towards it, feeding off my fear, until now. Now I was ready. The realization hit me like a wave, crashing over me with such force that I almost buckled under the weight of it. The barn had never been a shelter, a simple structure made of wood and nails. It had always been a trap, a prison designed to ensnare anyone who dared to enter. The sound I had heard all those nights, the whispering voices, the flickering shadows, they weren't just random phenomena. They were signs. Signs of the other world slowly bleeding into this one. I could feel it now, the way the air shimmered, the way the darkness in the barn seemed to pulse, as though it were alive, breathing. It was waiting for me to take the final step, to cross the threshold and fully surrender to it. I could almost hear it calling to me, a low hum vibrating through the walls, a soft, maddening chant that beckoned me closer. Come. It was a voice inside my head now, not just a whisper, but a command, a demand. It was stronger, more insistent, as if the barn itself were speaking to me, urging me to cross the line between the real world and whatever lay beyond. I wanted to turn away. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't. My feet moved forward, one step after another, as if I had no control over my own body. The darkness within the barn seemed to reach for me, pulling me in. The shadows clung to my skin like hands, dragging me closer to the heart of the barn, where the air was thick and oppressive. And then, as I reached the door, something changed. I don't know if it was the way the barn suddenly seemed to grow taller, stretching into the night sky, or the way the ground beneath me felt unstable, as if it were shifting, opening. But in that moment, I felt the weight of something ancient and powerful press down on me, the overwhelming sensation that something other was coming through, something that had been waiting for years, decades, maybe centuries. I knew, then, that it wasn't just my mind unraveling. It wasn't just the pressure of fear that was bending my thoughts. The barn wasn't just a place, it was a gateway. A thin place between worlds. And once I stepped into it, there would be no turning back. The realization hit me with a cold, terrifying clarity. The barn wasn't just a haunted building. It was a door, and the force on the other side wasn't a ghost. It was something far older, far more powerful, something that had been waiting for me, waiting for someone like me to come along. And now, I had no choice but to open that door. I don't know how long it's been since I last slept. Time has become a blurry mess, its steady passage disrupted by the constant hum of the barn, the whispers that have now woven themselves into my thoughts, too. The world outside seems distant, like a dream I can no longer remember, and the more I try to hold on to it, the more it slips away, like water through my fingers. The barn is always there now, in the back of my mind, like a shadow that follows me wherever I go. I can't escape it. Every time I close my eyes, I see it, the dark, endless stretch of wood, the flickering lights, the thing that waits inside. But it's more than just a place now. It's part of me, part of this maddening descent into something darker, something I can't explain. I hear the whispers again, but this time they're louder, clearer, and coming from all around me. Come closer. That's what they say. Let us in. It's as if the barn itself is inside me, wrapping around my thoughts, controlling them, twisting them into something else, something unrecognizable. My vision blurs, and I can't tell what's real anymore. The walls of my room shift, and I swear I see shadows crawling across the floor, creeping up the corners. I blink, and they're gone, but I know they're still there, lurking just beyond the reach of my eyes. The silence between the whispers is worse. It presses against me, suffocating. Every crack in the house, every gust of wind, every creak of the floorboards makes my heart race. Is it the house settling? Or is it the barn calling to me? I can't tell anymore. I try to leave. I tell myself, I need to get out of here. I need to breathe, to be anywhere but in this house, this cursed place. But when I step outside, the world feels wrong. The sky is too still, the trees too silent, the air too thick. Everything feels like it's watching me, as though the very land beneath my feet is alive, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I walk to the barn, even though every part of me screams to run, to get as far away as possible. It's the only thing I can think about. The pull is too strong now, as though the barn itself is calling me. And when I reach it, when I step over the threshold and into the darkness, I can feel the weight of it. The air grows colder, the darkness deeper, until I can barely make out the shape of the barn's interior. I've been in here so many times now, and yet each time feels like the first time. The barn shifts. The walls seem to move, stretching, pulling inward, as though they're closing in on me. I turn the flashlight on, but the beam flickers and fades, casting long, wavering shadows that crawl across the floor, growing and shrinking, twisting like they're alive. I know they're not real, but I can't stop the panic rising in my chest. Then the whispers start again, louder now, like a chorus of voices echoing from the walls, from the beams, from the very ground beneath my feet. Let us in, let us in. I stumble backward, my heart pounding in my throat, but when I look around, the shadows are gone. The barn is silent again. But the feeling is there, the weight of something watching, waiting. The temperature has dropped so much that I can see my breath in the air, yet my skin is slick with sweat. I turn to leave, but the door won't open. It's stuck. No matter how hard I pull, it won't budge. The barn has sealed me in. I know it has. I hear a sound behind me, and when I turn, I see it, the shape, the figure, standing in the far corner. But this time, it's different. This time, it's not a shadow. It's something real. I can see its outline now, tall, skeletal, with long arms that reach out toward me, fingers ending in sharp, jagged claws. Its face is hidden in the darkness, but I feel it. I feel its eyes on me, piercing into me. I scream, but no sound comes out. I try to move, but my feet won't obey. It's too late. The barn is alive now, alive with something ancient, something that has been waiting for me. The last thing I see before the darkness consumes me is the face, the eyes, glowing in the shadows. And then, everything goes black. When I wake up, I'm outside the barn. But it doesn't make sense. I can still feel it, the barn, the darkness, clinging to me like a second skin. My head aches. My body trembles. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know what's happening to me. I look around, but everything seems off. The trees don't sway the way they should. The sky is too red, too unnatural. And then I hear the whispers again, soft at first, but growing louder. You belong to us now. I spin around, trying to find the source, but there's nothing there, nothing but the barn, looming in the distance, its dark presence stretching toward me. I try to run, but my legs won't move. It's as though the very earth beneath me is holding me in place, anchoring me here. And then I understand. It's not the barn pulling me in anymore. I am the one being pulled into it. Everything is breaking apart. Reality is slipping through my fingers. The barn is no longer just a place, it's everywhere. It's inside me. And there's nothing I can do to escape it. I can't escape it. The barn is everywhere now, inside me, around me. The walls have started to melt into the very fabric of my mind, the darkness stretching and pulsing like something alive, breathing. Every corner of the barn is crawling with something. I can feel it, something watching, waiting, its presence wrapping around me like a shroud. And then, as if summoned by my terror, they appear. At first, I think I'm seeing things that I've finally snapped under the pressure of the fear and isolation. But no, these things are real. I can't deny it anymore. They step out of that. Shadows, one after another, like twisted, misshapen reflections of something that should never have been. There are no faces, no clear shapes. Just forms, shifting in ways that defy reason. They move in jerky, unnatural motions, their limbs elongated and bent in ways that don't make sense. I see flickers of claws, teeth, and eyes, but they are always obscured, hidden behind layers of darkness. Their bodies twist and contort, and their whispers, their voices, are like 1,000 broken whispers all coming from different places at once. One of them steps forward, and its form seems to change, becoming a mirror of myself. It mimics every movement I make, but with a grotesque delay, as if mocking me. When I raise my hand, it raises its, and when I flinch, it flinches back. But its movements are wrong, too fluid, too unnatural. It grins at me, an impossible smile stretching across its face, filled with sharp, jagged teeth that shouldn't exist. Another one leans in from the side, its form darkening the air around it. Its voice is the first I hear clearly, and when it speaks, the words scrape against my mind like nails on a chalkboard. You shouldn't have come here, child, it hisses, its voice low, dripping with malice. We've been waiting for you. I stagger back, trying to breathe, to make sense of what's happening. But they are all around me now, moving closer, their figures swirling like smoke, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. They seem to know everything about me, everything I've ever feared, ever wished for, ever regretted. They speak my thoughts before I can form them, laughing as they twist my deepest fears into grotesque, distorted images. The one in front of me begins to mimic my face, but its features twist into something monstrous, stretching into an elongated mask of terror. Its eyes grow wide and bloodshot, its skin decaying and writhing with worms and maggots. It laughs, a deep, bone-chilling laugh that seems to vibrate through my very bones. "You are nothing," it whispers, its voice like sandpaper against my ears. "Just another soul for us to devour." I want to scream. I want to run. But my body won't obey. My legs feel heavy, like they're filled with concrete, my mouth dry and useless. The barn closes in on me, the darkness seeping into my chest, into my lungs, until I can hardly breathe. The shapes, the entities, continue to move closer, surrounding me. Each of them is a reflection of my own fears, my own guilt. One takes the form of my father, his face twisted with rage, accusing me of every mistake I've ever made. Another forms into a long-forgotten friend, one I betrayed long ago, and it stares at me with hollow eyes, its voice a cold whisper of betrayal. The whispers overlap now, drying out my thoughts, pulling me under, suffocating me. I'm trapped, surrounded by things that don't belong here, that shouldn't exist. They speak of ancient evils, of beings that have existed long before this barn, long before I was ever born. They speak of a hunger that has never been satisfied. "We will consume you, like all the others." The voice echoes, reverberating in my skull. I can't move, can't scream. It's as if my body is paralyzed by their gaze, each one staring at me with eyes that aren't eyes, their forms flickering in and out of reality. The shadows around them twist and churn, distorting the air until I can't even tell where their bodies end and the darkness begins. "The barn is ours," one of them says, its voice like the scraping of stone against stone. "You are nothing but a fleeting moment, a spark that will be snuffed out." And then I understand, this place, this barn, isn't just a haunting ground. It's a gateway, a portal to something far older, far darker than I could ever comprehend. These things, they don't just live here. They feed here. They've been waiting for someone like me, someone weak enough, someone lost enough to draw them out. But the terror of their words is nothing compared to the terror of the silence that follows. The whispers die down, the shapes pull back, and the barn settles into an oppressive stillness. For a moment, I think maybe I've imagined it all, that I've lost my mind entirely. But when I glance at the floor beneath me, I see the traces. The marks of something that shouldn't be there, deep gouges in the dirt, twisted symbols, like claw marks. Like scratches made by something trying to pull its way through. The barn isn't just a barn. It's a prison. A trap. And I'm its prisoner. The entities have stopped speaking, but their presence remains. They are the barn. They always have been. And I know now, I've crossed the line. There's no turning back. I don't know how many days have passed since I last felt the warmth of sunlight on my skin. The barn has become all-consuming, a dark vortex pulling me deeper with each passing moment. The fear, the whispers, the relentless presence, they have stripped me of everything. My body feels like a shell, hollow and worn thin by the constant strain. I haven't eaten properly in what feels like weeks. Every time I try, the food turns to ash in my mouth. The thought of swallowing anything makes my stomach twist in revolt. My bones ache with a deep, gnawing hunger, but it's not for food. It's something darker, something that feels more like a need to feed the terror, to feed the darkness that has embedded itself in my mind and body. I've lost weight. I can feel it with each glance at my reflection in the old, cracked mirror hanging in the corner of the farmhouse. My skin is taut, stretched too tightly over my face. My eyes are hollow now, sunken into dark circles that refuse to fade, no matter how much I sleep or try to sleep. I can't tell if the dizziness I feel is from exhaustion or something else, something inside me that's slipping further away, something otherworldly that's reaching into my mind, twisting it into new shapes. Sleep has become a torment. I dream of the barn, always the barn. The shadows twist and stretch into figures that move with a terrifying familiarity. I wake up gasping for air, my sheets soaked through with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I feel like it might burst out of my chest. And the barn, it's always there, in the background of my mind, calling to me, pulling at me like an invisible hand. But it's not just my mind unraveling. I can feel it in my body. My muscles are weak, my joints sore and stiff from the endless nights of pacing, of staring into the darkness, waiting for it to come for me. Every step I take feels like I'm dragging a weight, every breath is shallow, ragged. It's as though my own body is betraying me, decaying from the inside out. I'm losing control. There are times when I catch myself staring at my own hands, wondering if they still belong to me. The skin is pale, almost translucent. My fingers tremble uncontrollably, the smallest task becoming a struggle. It's hard to focus on anything anymore, especially on the people I used to know. They're distant memories now, faces in old photographs that don't feel like mine anymore. I try to remember what it was like before, but the images fade, replaced by the suffocating darkness of the barn. The mirrors, they never lie. I can see it now. There's something wrong with me. Something deep within me, beneath the surface, twisting and churning. I'm losing my grip on what's real. The voices are louder now. They come while I'm alone, whispering from the shadows of the barn, from the corners of my own house. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, exhaustion, paranoia, whatever it might be, but now I know better. They're not just in my head. There are nights when I close my eyes, and I swear I can feel them standing behind me, their breath cold against my neck. Their whispers in my ear, promises of things I can't quite understand. Come closer. They beckon, we're waiting. You can't run from us. I try to ignore them, but it's impossible. It's like a virus, spreading through every thought, every flicker of my mind. Every sound, every shadow, it all feels connected to the barn. To them. And as the days blur together, I begin to see things in the corner of my vision. Shadows that don't belong. Figures that vanish when I turn to face them. I know they're watching me. I know they're waiting. I can feel the pull. The barn is calling to me. I'm becoming something else. I can feel it deep within my bones. Something is feeding off me, growing stronger with every passing moment. The darkness is consuming me, and I can't stop it. My thoughts are slipping away, unraveling like a thread pulled from an old sweater. I try to hold on, to remember who I was, but it's slipping through my fingers, fading into the darkness. The barn has become my whole world, my only reality. There's no escape. There's nowhere left to run. I am losing myself to it, to whatever this is. And in the silence of the barn, I can hear them whispering again. You belong to us now. I can't keep running. I can't keep hiding in the shadows, pretending that the barn isn't a part of me now. Every night it calls to me, louder than before, its whispers clawing at my mind, twisting my thoughts. The barn has become my prison, my torment, and I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before I'm consumed entirely. Tonight, I will face it. I will go to the barn, stand in the heart of the darkness, and demand answers. I'm tired of being its puppet, tired of being dragged into the depths of my own terror. Whatever this force is, whatever it wants, it's time to end it. Time to put an end to this madness once and for all. I can barely feel my own feet as I walk toward the barn. My legs are weak, my heart racing in my chest, but there's a burning determination in my gut. I know I won't leave until I've confronted it, whatever it is. I've lost so much, my sanity, my health, my very sense of self, and I refuse to lose anything more. As I step into the barn, the familiar chill settles around me, the air thick with something malignant. The shadows seem to move on their own, curling like serpents around the rafters, waiting. I take a deep breath, pushing down the overwhelming wave of fear that threatens to drown me. The whispers are already there, swirling in the air like a fog. I hear them, but I won't let them control me anymore. I'm here, I say, my voice shaking but steady. Show yourself. For a moment, there's nothing but silence, the kind of silence that feels like the calm before a storm. Then, it happens. The air in the barn shifts, like something heavy is moving in the dark. I see it before I hear it, a shape emerging from the shadows, twisting and writhing in ways that no living thing should be able to. It's not a figure, not a person. It's something darker, something ancient, and as it steps forward, the barn itself seems to breathe in unison with it, as though it, too, is alive. The thing before me is inhuman. Its form is an amalgamation of shifting darkness, with tendrils of blackness that stretch out and retreat in time with its movements. The eyes, if they can be called eyes, glow a sickly yellow, like the light of an old, dying lantern, flickering with malice. Its voice doesn't come from its mouth, it comes from everywhere at once, filling the barn, crashing into my skull. You're too late. The words are a low growl, like gravel scraping against stone. They vibrate in the air, making my skin crawl. I try to steady my breath, but my chest is tight, my heart thudding in my ears. This is it. The thing I've been running from. The force that has haunted my every thought. And now I have to face it, head on. What do you want from me? I force out the words, trying to sound stronger than I feel. Why did you choose me? What are you? The figure tilts its head, the motion disturbing, as though it's studying me, savoring my fear. It moves closer, the air around it growing colder, heavier. I can feel the weight of its presence pressing on me, smothering me with its suffocating darkness. You were never meant to know peace, it whispers. We feed on fear. We thrive in the darkness of the human soul. You were lost the moment you stepped onto this land. We are the shadows you ignore, the monsters beneath your bed. You've always known we were here. But now, you belong to us. Its voice lingers in the air, the words dripping with an ancient hunger. The thing doesn't need to speak, though. I can feel it, deep inside me, the hunger, the pull, the desire to consume. This force has been feeding on me, feeding on my terror, growing stronger with each passing day. And I realize, with a horrifying clarity, that it isn't just after me. It's after everything. This barn, it continues, its voice now a sickening whisper, is the gateway. And you are the key. I step back, my hands trembling. No, I won't let you have me. I won't let you win. The creature laughs, a low, guttural sound that sends a shiver down my spine. Its body shifts, contorting as if it's too large for the barn itself. The shadows stretch and writhe around it, pressing in on all sides, like the walls themselves are closing in. You cannot escape. Its voice is the sound of 1,000 voices, all speaking over each other, merging into one terrible cacophony. You have already lost. The fear is inside you. You belong to the darkness now. I can feel it. The weight of its words, the weight of the fear it's placed in my chest, gnawing at my soul. But I can't give up, not now. Not after everything. I clutch the flashlight tighter in my hand. It feels like a weak, feeble weapon against the terror before me, but it's all I have left. The creature advances, its form shifting with every step. It reaches out toward me, its shadowy tendrils stretching toward my face. I'm paralyzed, my body refusing to move, but something inside me snaps. I scream louder than I've screamed in days, in weeks, my voice breaking through the suffocating darkness. No! The barn shakes, the walls groaning in protest as the air grows thick with an unnatural pressure. I can feel the presence of the creature, feel it pulling at me, trying to swallow me whole. But I won't let it. I push the fear down, bury it deep inside. You won't take me, I shout again, louder this time, my voice unwavering. I am not yours to take. The creature falters, its form flickering for a split second, and I seize the moment. I turn and run, not looking back, not daring to see if it follows. I can hear it, feel it, as though it's right behind me, but I don't stop. I won't stop. I make it to the door, and with one final push, I break free from the barn. The night air hits my face like a slap, cold and sharp, but it's real. It's alive. And I'm still here. I'm still human. For the first time in weeks, I can breathe. But I know it's not over. The barn still stands, the shadows still linger, and the creature, whatever it is, will never let me go. It has marked me. It knows me. And I have just begun to understand the terrible cost of what I've faced. I can feel it still, deep inside. The hunger. And the barn is waiting. The barn door slams behind me, and for a moment, I feel as though I've escaped. The chill of the night air fills my lungs, and I try to steady my racing heart, but the terror still lingers. I can still feel it, like a shadow on the edge of my vision. The weight of the thing in the barn presses against me, its darkness like a lingering presence, crawling under my skin. I stumble forward, the ground beneath me unsteady as I try to make sense of what I've just witnessed. The creature, the whispers, the unnatural weight of the barn itself, it all crashes together in a jumble of confusion and dread. But there's something I need to understand, something more, something the entity hasn't told me. I can't just run away. Not after everything I've seen. I turn, looking back at the barn, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the moonlight. I hear nothing now, the whispers, the laughter, the shuffling, everything is silent. But I know better than to trust that silence. Something in the pit of my stomach tells me the barn is far from done with me. Suddenly, the air grows thick again, and the shadows around me seem to twist, as though they're reaching for me, curling inwards like a noose. I freeze, terror gripping my chest. I was wrong to think I could escape. It's not over. The voice comes again, but this time it's clearer, closer, and full of venomous certainty. It fills the air around me, vibrating through my bones. You cannot outrun what is inside you. I gasp, spinning around, but I see no one. The voice isn't coming from the barn anymore. It's inside me, deep inside my head. I can't escape it. You are already one of us, The voice continues, "You belong to the darkness now. There is no freedom for you, no escape." The words hit me like a physical blow, making my knees buckle. My mind races, my pulse pounding in my ears. This thing, this force, it's been toying with me all along. I thought I could fight it, that I could push it away, but I was wrong. It's not something I can defeat. It's a part of me now, deeper than I ever imagined. A cold laugh echoes in my mind, and suddenly the shadows around me surge forward, gathering into a swirling mass, a black cloud of inky darkness. I want to scream, to run, but my feet are rooted to the ground. The barn's malevolent pull is too strong. Then, the figure appears again, more solid, more real this time, its form coalescing from the shadows like a living nightmare. The creature is towering, its twisted body flickering in and out of shape, its dark tendrils extending toward me like cruel, skeletal hands. "You are nothing," it sneers. A fleeting thought in the mind of a dying world. I am an ancient one, older than this land itself, older than your feeble human understanding. I have fed on fear, on despair, for centuries. Your ancestors knew me. They came here, just as you did, searching for answers they were never meant to find. And they, too, became mine. I try to speak, but my mouth is dry, and my breath comes in shallow gasps. The thing before me, this force, is more than just a haunting. It's a living entity, an ancient being that has existed for as long as this land itself. It's been waiting, feeding, growing stronger with every generation that has stepped foot on this cursed farm. I was born in the darkness, it continues, its voice low and cruel. I have always been here, beneath the earth, in the walls of this barn, feeding on those who dare trespass. Your fear is a feast for me. You don't understand. I consume not just the body, but the soul. I take control of the ones who are weak, who succumb to their terror. And in return, I offer them power, power beyond your understanding. Those who fall under my influence become mine to control, their bodies vessels for my hunger. You, too, will become one of them. I stagger back, my heart racing, my thoughts swirling in panic. No, I won't become one of you. I won't. The creature's tendrils reach for me, curling around the air like serpents. It's too much. The pull is overwhelming, its presence suffocating. It's like my thoughts are being yanked away from me, dragged into the void. I can feel the darkness creeping into my mind, twisting my thoughts, forcing me to see my own fears come to life. The shadows pulse with a sickening rhythm, each beat like the throbbing of my own heart. You are already lost, it whispers. You've been mine since the moment you stepped onto this land. The more you resist, the stronger I become. But there is a way to save yourself. Come to me, and let go of your fear. I will give you power. I will make you one of us. I feel it then, the temptation gnawing at me, the sweet lure of surrender. Power. Control. No more fear. All I have to do is give in. But deep down, I know it's a lie. The thing offers no salvation. It's only a predator, feeding on the weak, trapping them in eternal darkness. With every ounce of strength I can muster, I scream, forcing the darkness back, pushing it away from my mind. I can feel it tearing at me, but I refuse to let it win. I won't become like you, I say, my voice trembling but resolute. I won't let you take me. I won't let you control me. The entity pauses, its figure flickering with irritation, its eyes burning with fury. The shadows around me twist violently, but I stand firm, my mind screaming for control. The barn shakes, as if it's trying to collapse in on itself, the walls groaning with rage. You think you can fight me? It growls. You are nothing but a fleeting breath in my endless hunger. You cannot stop me. But I know now that I am not alone in this. The very earth beneath me, the people who lived here before me, the ones who fought and died, their memories, their spirits, they're here, too. They have always been here. I don't know how, but I can feel their presence, their strength rising within me. In the end, the creature is no match for the will of those who refuse to be consumed. Its screams echo through the barn as it flickers and fades into the shadows, its power waning. I don't know if it's truly gone. I don't know if the barn is truly free. But for the first time, I feel a sliver of peace, a fleeting moment of clarity. The darkness has lost its grip, and I've survived. But the land is cursed, and the barn still stands, waiting for the next soul to wander in. And as I leave it behind, I know that the cycle will never end. The darkness will always return. And I will always remember. The air in the barn grows colder, heavier, suffocating. The shadows twist and churn, becoming darker, denser. I can feel them crawling over my skin, wrapping around my chest, my throat. It's as if the darkness itself is trying to suffocate me, to claim me entirely. I force myself to breathe, the air thick in my lungs, but every exhale feels like it could be my last. I try to steady my shaking hands, the flashlight trembling in my grip. I can hear the entity laughing in my mind, mocking me. You cannot fight me, boy, it taunts. I am everywhere. I am in your mind. I am your thoughts. I am your fear. The barn seems to distort around me. The walls bend and groan, stretching like a grotesque caricature of reality. The floor beneath me warps, shifting like it's alive. I stumble, nearly falling, but I catch myself, my pulse hammering in my ears. This is it. The final moment. The moment I either break or survive. I can feel my deepest fears creeping up from the shadows, swirling into my thoughts, taking root in my very soul. The barn, once a place of eerie silence, now echoes with the tortured memories I've buried deep inside, my failures, my guilt, the people I've let down. I know your heart, your mind, the voice whispers, you cannot hide from me. I am your guilt. I am your weakness. I will make you see the truth, your truth. The darkness inside me begins to manifest, pulling those fears from my past and bringing them to life. I see her, my sister's face twisted in pain, accusing me of abandoning her when she needed me most. I hear my father's angry voice, berating me for not being strong enough, not being enough. Each word, each image, claws at my mind, digging deeper. I am everything you fear. I am everything you regret, the voice hisses. And you will surrender. You will give in. There is no escape. I feel my knees buckle, the weight of my failures pressing down on me. I want to scream, to give in, to let the darkness take me and end this torment. But I fight. I fight with every ounce of strength I have left. No. I gasp, pushing back against the phantom images, the feelings of guilt. I won't let you have me. I won't let you win. The darkness presses in, but I force myself to stand tall, the shadows clawing at my legs, my arms, but I stand firm. I see her again, my sister's face, but this time I see her smile, the warmth in her eyes. I hear my father's voice, not accusing, but full of love, reminding me of the strength I've always had. The barn begins to shake, the shadows lashing out, but I refuse to let them consume me. I scream with everything I have left. You are not my fears. You are nothing. The entity's laughter turns into a growl, a guttural sound that shakes the walls. The darkness recoils, momentarily faltering. You think you can defy me? It spits. I am eternal. I am power itself. I can feel its hold on me weakening, but it isn't gone yet. It still lingers in my thoughts, pulling at my mind, trying to drag me down. But now I see it for what it is, nothing but a parasite feeding off the fear and pain of the living. It is not invincible. It is a coward, hiding behind my weaknesses, hiding behind my fears. I step forward, my voice trembling but resolute. I will not become a part of your darkness. You cannot take me. The entity screams in rage, the shadows swirling around me like a tornado. But I stand my ground. I am not the frightened boy who stepped onto this land. I am stronger now. I have faced my fears. I will not let them control me. The barn shakes violently, the walls cracking, the floor splintering. The darkness is fighting back, but it's losing. I can feel it unraveling, its power dissipating like smoke in the wind. No, the entity howls, its form flickering, warping, and finally collapsing into itself. The shadows recede, feeding into the corners of the barn. The air grows still. The oppressive weight lifts. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, I can breathe again. The barn is no longer a place of terror. It is just a barn, an empty space where a terrible thing once lived. But it's gone now, and I am free. The ground beneath my feet is solid again. The barn is quiet, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. I stand there, in the stillness, my chest heaving, my mind finally clear. I survived. But at what cost? I know that this is not the end. The barn will always be here, waiting, just as it has waited for so many before me. And I know that the darkness will return one day to claim another soul. But I also know that I am not powerless. I will fight it again if I have to. I will never let it take me. And with that thought, I turn and walk away, leaving the barn behind me. It is not over. But for now, I have one. The barn's oppressive presence surrounds me, clawing at my mind. The shadows stretch further than they should, crawling like tendrils reaching for me, suffocating me with their cold embrace. The air is thick with dread, as if every breath I take is laced with the very essence of fear. My heart pounds in my chest, erratic, desperate. But I will not let it win. You cannot resist, boy, the entity whispers, its voice like a hiss in the back of my mind. Look at what you've become. Look at what you are about to lose. You are nothing without me. I can feel it, the force, twisting my thoughts, pulling at the seams of my sanity. I hear the whispers again, louder now, a chorus of voices rising from the depths of my fear. They speak of failure, of hopelessness, of every mistake I've ever made. Each word cuts deeper than any blade. The floor beneath me shifts, the barn around me warping like a nightmare. The shadows dance, elongating and multiplying, as if mocking me, taunting me. The walls close in, the ceiling lowering as if to crush me. I stagger back, trying to keep my footing, but the pressure mounts with each passing second. I feel the weight of the world on my shoulders, and every inch of my body screams for release. Look around, the entity's voice croons, seductive and cold. Do you see it? Do you see how it all ends? The barn fades, and suddenly, I'm standing in my childhood home, the place where all my pain began. I hear my mother's voice, soft and comforting at first, but soon it turns sharp, accusing. Why did you leave me? Why didn't you help me? Her words lash at my heart, and I try to speak, to explain, but no sound comes out. I want to reach for her, to apologize, but my body is frozen, paralyzed by guilt. The image distorts, warping into something darker. I see her, pale and lifeless, her eyes empty, her face twisted in horror. I reach for her, but she vanishes into the darkness, leaving only the silence of my own failure. You couldn't save her, the entity growls, its voice filling every corner of my mind. You never could. And you never will. I stagger, my knees shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The world around me shifts again, and now I see my father, angry, his face contorted with disappointment. His voice fills my ears. You're weak. You've always been weak. You never lived up to anything. You're nothing. His words are like knives, slicing into my soul, each one more cutting than the last. I want to scream, to tell him he's wrong, but the words get caught in my throat. The guilt, the shame, they drown me. I feel the weight of years of regret crashing down on me, suffocating me. I fall to my knees, my vision blurring, and the darkness closes in even tighter. The shadows twist and shift, their laughter echoing in my ears. Give in, they chant. You're nothing. You'll never escape. But even as the darkness presses in, even as the weight of my past threatens to pull me under, I hear something else. A small, quiet voice, my own voice, whispers through the chaos. I'm not weak. I'm not nothing. I'm stronger than this. I focus on that voice, that small spark of defiance, and I push back against the force with everything I have. The shadows falter, their grip loosening for just a moment. I force myself to my feet, despite the pain, despite the terror clawing at my mind. I won't let you win, I say, my voice trembling but determined. The entity snarls, its form warping, distorting in anger. You think you can resist me? You think you can survive? I close my eyes, focusing on the one thing that remains untouched by the darkness, my will. I refuse to let it break me. I refuse to let my fears control me any longer. I will not surrender. With a final, guttural scream, I push forward, my mind shattering, but I hold on, fighting against the psychological nightmare that threatens to consume me. The shadows recoil, dissipating into the void. The barn begins to fade, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a fog. For a moment, I stand there in the quiet, breathing deeply, my chest rising and falling, the echoes of the entity's voice fading into nothingness. I am still standing. I am still here. But I know this is not over. The battle is only just beginning. The barn is no longer a barn, it's a hellscape, a writhing mass of shadows and whispers, twisting in every direction. The walls pulse with a sickening rhythm, like a heartbeat, as if the barn itself is alive, feeding on the fear that churns within me. The air is thick, suffocating, heavy with the weight of what has been and what is about to happen. The entity is everywhere. It moves within the walls, it seeps from the ground beneath me, it fills my mind with its whispers, its promises. Its voice is all I hear now, echoing through my skull, pulling me into the depths of despair. You cannot fight me, boy, it croons, soothing and malevolent at once. I am ancient. I have seen countless souls fall before me. You are no different. You are mine. I stagger forward, my legs shaking beneath me, but I refuse to fall. My vision swims with fleeting images, my mother's face, my father's disappointment, the faces of people I loved, all twisted by fear, by guilt, by regret. They stare at me from the shadows, their eyes accusing, their voices full of judgment. Do you want to save them? The entity whispers. Do you want to stop this? I freeze, the words striking a chord deep within me. Ow! I manage to croak, my throat tight, raw from fear and strain. You know what you must do, the voice murmurs, smooth and insidious. Give yourself to me. Let me take your body. Let me take your soul. It's the only way. The only way to end this. To end this suffering. You will be free. No more pain, no more fear. Only peace. I tremble, the temptation creeping in, seductive and overwhelming. The shadows beckon me, their tendrils curling around my limbs, pulling me toward the heart of the darkness. But even as the darkness presses in, something within me resists. I close my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to find my center amid the storm of terror. I think of everything that has brought me here, the loss, the guilt, the pain, and I know that if I give in, it won't end. It will never end. No, the word leaves my lips before I even realize I've spoken it. I won't let you take me. The force grows more furious, its presence crushing, suffocating. I can feel its anger, its frustration, as it claws at my mind, tearing at my resolve. The shadows churn violently, swirling around me, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. The air is suffocating, and I feel the weight of the barn's malevolent presence pushing me to the ground. You think you can win? The entity hisses. You think you can resist? You are weak. You will die in here. There is no escaping me. No one escapes me. My heart pounds, my body trembling as I feel the weight of its words. My legs feel as though they're made of stone, heavy and unmovable. My mind swims with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. Then, I feel it, a flicker of light. A small, fragile spark deep within me, amidst the encroaching darkness. It's the last thread of hope, the last bit of strength I have left. I am not helpless. I am not alone. I choose to fight. The words come out like a breath, weak but filled with defiance. With that simple declaration, the barn begins to change. The shadows screech in agony, twisting violently, pulling away from me as though repelled by the force of my resolve. I can feel the entity's grasp loosening, its power waning in the face of my defiance. But it's not enough. The barn is still alive, still hungry. And the force, the ancient entity, will stop at nothing to break me. The decision looms before me, give in and become its vessel, a puppet of darkness, or fight and risk my life to escape. I close my eyes, feeling the weight of my choice. There is no turning back. I am too far gone now. The barn, the shadows, the whispers, they will either consume me or I will break free. If I die fighting. With every ounce of strength I have left, I push forward, through the darkness, through the suffocating fear, toward the exit. The barn shakes violently, the walls groaning as if in pain. The entity roars, a deafening screech that rattles my bones, but I won't stop. I won't let it win. I stumble toward the door, my mind spinning, my vision blurring, but I am so close. The threshold is just ahead, and the light from the outside world beckons like a distant star. With one final surge of will, I throw myself through the door. The moment my feet hit the ground outside, the barn's roar fades into the night. The air is cool, the stars shining above me, the silence almost deafening. But I know this is far from over. The choice I made has cost me everything, but in the end, I've chosen to survive. And as long as I live, the darkness will never fully let me go. The battle will continue, within me and around me. But I will fight every step of the way. The silence is deafening. The barn, now just a shadow behind me, feels like it's still watching. The wind is gentle, the air crisp, and the world around me seems unchanged. But inside, I'm not the same. The weight of what happened lingers, pressing down on my chest, tightening my breath. I try to tell myself that the entity is gone, that I've escaped its clutches, but I know better. It's not the barn that haunts me now, it's the fear, the presence that lives on in the pit of my stomach, in the corners of my vision. I can't escape it. I thought I'd killed it, or at least banished it, but the truth is harder to accept. The barn was never just a structure, it was a conduit, a gateway to something much darker. And even though I've left it behind, it's left its mark on me. The memories flood back, those final moments, the battle for my mind, the overwhelming sensation of being watched. The air inside the barn had been thick, suffocating. And now, even out here in the open air, I feel the same weight. I glance over my shoulder at the barn, still there in the distance, shrouded in the fading light of day. But I'm not drawn to it anymore. The compulsion, that need to return, is gone. Or so I tell myself. I feel sick just looking at it. But even as I turn my back and take a step forward, a small voice inside me whispers, what if it's not really over? The silence is broken only by the sound of my footsteps crunching on the gravel path. But in my mind, I hear it, the soft, insistent whisper just beneath the surface of my thoughts, pulling at the frayed edges of my sanity. The entity is gone, I tell myself. But the truth is, it has never really left. I reach for my phone, my fingers trembling as I unlock it, but my hands feel like they don't belong to me anymore. I open the messages from my uncle, who had called several times, wondering if I'm alright. I read them absently, as though the words are someone else's. I'm not alright. I haven't been for days, maybe longer. The darkness that lived in that barn, the one that twisted my mind, is still inside me. I can still hear the whispers. They start as a faint murmur, but as I walk further away from the barn, they grow louder. It's not just in my ears anymore. It's in my mind, my thoughts. I don't know if it's real or if I've lost my grip on reality. I want to run. I want to escape this feeling, this oppressive, suffocating sense of dread that wraps around me like a shroud. But I can't run far enough. Every step I take, I feel the presence at my back. It's following me. I can feel it in my bones. I try to convince myself it's just exhaustion, that it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know the truth. The force isn't just in the barn. It's inside me now. It's become a part of me. I tried to leave. I told myself that the farm was no longer my place, that I had to get away, get far, far away from the barn, from everything that had happened. But even as I pack my things, something pulls at me, something unseen, almost like a thread tugging on my chest. The barn's influence lingers, wrapped around me like an invisible chain. It's as if the place has marked me, left its imprint on my soul. Every step I take toward the gate, every time I try to walk away, there's a force that stops me. It's subtle at first, just a small hesitation, a tug of doubt, but it grows stronger, gnawing at me. When I reach the end, of the driveway, I can't help but turn around. The barn sits there in the distance, just a silhouette against the dull sky, but its presence is as undeniable as ever. I stand there, frozen, staring at it. I want to keep walking. I want to leave. But my feet feel heavy, like they're stuck in mud, rooted to the ground. The whispers, so faint before, grow louder in my mind. They're not voices anymore, they're thoughts, memories, dreams. I hear my own name, but it's distorted, twisted, as if someone else is calling it from the darkness of the barn. For a moment, I wonder if I'm imagining it. My body trembles with fear, with exhaustion. I feel like I'm at the edge of a precipice, teetering on the brink of something I can't understand. Every instinct tells me to go, to leave this place behind for good. But the pull is irresistible, like gravity itself is pulling me back toward the barn. I take a step forward, but I don't make it far before a cold breeze sweeps across the field, sharp and biting, as though the air itself is warning me. The barn seems to exhale, sending a ripple of unease through the air. It feels like the building itself is alive, breathing, watching me. I turn away again, but the sense of dread follows me, as if something is lurking just behind me, waiting to grab hold of me. The barn has infected my mind, my thoughts. I can't shake the feeling that if I leave, I'll be leaving a part of myself behind, that the darkness will never truly let me go. I walk back to the farmhouse, every step feeling heavier than the last. The air feels thick, oppressive, as if it's suffocating me. The barn stands there, waiting, even though I can't see it from the window. I know it's there. I can feel its presence pressing in from all sides. I don't know how much longer I can stay. I try to push the thoughts away. I try to keep busy, to do anything that will take my mind off it. But it's impossible. The barn, that dark place, won't let go of me. It whispers in the silence, crawls into my thoughts when I least expect it. Even in the light of day, I can feel it pulling at me, a constant reminder of what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've felt. I sit in the quiet of my uncle's house, trying to relax, but the room feels too small. My thoughts are trapped in the shadows, twisted and broken. I want to sleep, but when I close my eyes, I see the barn, its dark corners stretching, its walls pulsing like a heartbeat. I see the figure I thought I had left behind, the one that watched me, that toyed with me. I know I have to leave. I can't stay here any longer, but the idea of walking away from the farm, from the place that has come to feel like a prison, fills me with dread. I feel as though if I leave, I'll never be able to return. And worse yet, I wonder if I'll even survive if I do. The days blur together. Time has lost all meaning. I can't remember what day it is anymore, or how long it's been since I first stepped into that cursed barn. It feels like an eternity, but also like no time has passed at all. I'm stuck in a loop, trapped in a nightmare from which I can't wake. My mind, once sharp and focused, is now a fragmented mess. Each thought feels like it's being pulled apart, like the very fabric of my reality is being torn at the seams. It starts with the smallest things. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow stretching too far across the floor. I convince myself that I'm just tired, that my mind is playing tricks on me, but deep down, I know better. It's the barn. It's always been the barn. The whispers, soft at first, have grown louder. They echo in my mind, a constant murmur I can't escape. I can't tell if they're real or just a product of my crumbling sanity. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the barn calling to me, beckoning me back to the place where it all started. The force is patient, I realize. It waits. It's not gone. Not by a long shot. I spend my days pacing through the farmhouse, restless, unable to sit still. The walls feel like they're closing in on me. I can hear the creaks of the floorboards, the soft groan of the house settling, but in my mind, it's always the barn. The sound of the wind rustling the crops outside feels like the rustle of things moving in the shadows. I try to distract myself. I read, I work, I even try to talk to my uncle, but his words are distant, hollow. He doesn't understand. No one does. I'm starting to lose myself, to lose the grip I once had on what's real and what's not. The barn has become a symbol of something more. It's a part of me now. The whispers follow me everywhere, taunting me with images I can't shake, visions of the barn, the figure, the shadow that watched me, that still watches me. I can't remember the last time I slept. The nightmares are worse when I do. They pull me back into that place, back into the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the barn. I see it again, the shadowy figure, but this time it's closer, its face hidden in the darkness. It speaks to me, its voice a soft hiss, a promise of something worse if I don't return. It wants me. I know it. It wants me to come back, to step into its grasp. The toll on my mind is unbearable. I see it everywhere now, an outline in the dark, the faintest hint of a shape that shouldn't be there. I hear the barns creaking in my ears even when I'm far away from it. My thoughts are consumed by it. I can't focus on anything else. The darkness, that ancient presence, has taken hold of me. And no matter where I go, no matter how far I try to run, it's always with me. I begin to question if I'm even here at all. Am I still on the farm? Is this just another part of the hallucination, another piece of the puzzle I can't see clearly? The whispers never stop. They invade my dreams, my waking hours, and there's no escaping them. No matter how much I scream, no matter how much I beg for peace, it only grows louder. I've become obsessed. I've become its. The fear is always there, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, threatening to swallow me whole. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending that I'm okay. My hands tremble, my mind fractures with each passing day, and I can't shake the feeling that the barn is calling me back. Every thought I have, every word I say, every action I take, all of it is tied to the barn. The fear, the whispers, the haunting sense of being watched. And now, I wonder, what happens if I don't go back? What happens if I just give into it, let it consume me completely? Is that what it wants? Am I already too far gone to save myself? I'm not sure anymore. I stand at the edge of the field, the breeze cold against my skin, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. The farmhouse is behind me, distant, but I can't shake the pull that draws my gaze toward the barn. Even now, after everything, I feel it, a constant tug, an invisible thread that connects me to that place, as if it will never truly let me go. The barn looms in the distance, dark and silent. It doesn't look any different, but I know better. I've felt its presence every second since I left. It's still there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. And no matter how far I try to walk, no matter how much I try to move on, it will always be with me. I try to look away, but my body betrays me. My feet move forward, slowly, without my permission. The whispers return, soft at first, like a breeze through the trees, then louder, more urgent. They call my name, but it's not my name anymore. It's something deeper, something older. The barn has changed me. I am no longer the same person who walked into it all those nights ago. The air grows heavier as I approach, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. The barn feels alive. It's dark, hollow windows like watching eyes, waiting for me to step closer. My heart races, and for a moment, I think I can hear the whispers more clearly. It's here. It knows I've returned. It has always known. I stop, frozen in place. I can't go back in there. I can't face it again. But the pull is unbearable. A cold wind sweeps over me, the sound of rustling leaves mingling with a distant laugh, a dry, hollow laugh that echoes in the pit of my stomach. The figure is there again, just out of reach, always just beyond the corner of my eye. I shake my head, trying to clear my mind, but it's no use. The line between reality and nightmare has blurred beyond repair. I've been marked, and there is no escaping it now. As I turn to leave, I hear it, soft, almost imperceptible at first. A whisper, no louder than the wind, but unmistakably clear, "Come back." My breath catches in my throat. I stop dead in my tracks, my heart pounding, as if my very soul is being pulled back to that place, back to the darkness. I glance over my shoulder, and there it is, the barn, standing there like a shadow in the fading light, its windows staring back at me, unblinking. The world around me is silent now. There's nothing but the sound of my own breath, ragged and shallow. The whisper comes again, this time louder, more insistent, "Come back. You cannot leave. You belong here." I turn away, but my legs feel heavy, unwilling to move. The barn's power is everywhere. It has seeped into the very air, into my bones. I don't know if I'm still in control of my body, or if the barn has already claimed me. I don't know if I'll ever escape. As I walk away, the last thing I hear is the sound of laughter, a cold, hollow laugh that shakes me to my core. The barn, the force, has not let go. The nightmare is not over. It never was. I stand at the edge of the field, the breeze cold against my skin, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. The farmhouse is behind me, distant, but I can't shake the pull that draws my gaze toward the barn. Even now, after everything, I feel it, a constant tug, an invisible thread that connects me to that place, as if it will never truly let me go. The barn looms in the distance, dark and silent. It doesn't look any different, but I know better. I've felt its presence every second since I left. It's still there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. And no matter how far I try to walk, no matter how much I try to move on, it will always be with me. I try to look away, but my body betrays me. My feet move forward, slowly, without my permission. The whispers return, soft at first, like a breeze through the trees, then louder, more urgent. They call my name, but it's not my name anymore. It's something deeper, something older. The barn has changed me. I am no longer the same person who walked into it all those nights ago. The air grows heavier as I approach, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. The barn feels alive. It's dark, hollow windows like watching eyes, waiting for me to step closer. My heart races, and for a moment, I think I can hear the whispers more clearly. It's here. It knows I've returned. It has always known. I stop, frozen in place. I can't go back in there. I can't face it again. But the pull is unbearable. A cold wind sweeps over me, the sound of rustling leaves mingling with a distant laugh, a dry, hollow laugh that echoes in the pit of my stomach. The figure is there again, just out of reach, always just beyond the corner of my eye. I shake my head, trying to clear my mind, but it's no use. The line between reality and nightmare has blurred beyond repair. I've been marked, and there is no escaping it now. As I turn to leave, I hear it, soft, almost imperceptible at first. A whisper, no louder than the wind, but unmistakably clear, "Come back." My breath catches in my throat. I stop dead in my tracks, my heart pounding, as if my very soul is being pulled back to that place, back to the darkness. I glance over my shoulder, and there it is, the barn, standing there like a shadow in the fading light, its windows staring back at me, unblinking. The world around me is silent now. There's nothing but the sound of my own breath, ragged and shallow. The whisper comes again, this time louder, more insistent, "Come back. You cannot leave. You belong here." I turn away, but my legs feel heavy, unwilling to move. The barn's power is everywhere. It has seeped into the very air, into my bones. I don't know if I'm still in control of my body, or if the barn has already claimed me. I don't know if I'll ever escape. As I walk away, the last thing I hear is the sound of laughter, a cold, hollow laugh that shakes me to my core. The barn, the force, has not let go. The nightmare is not over. It never was. I finally return to the farmhouse, convinced that I've outrun the darkness. I think I can sleep. I think I can breathe again. But something is wrong. I hear it before I see it, soft, almost imperceptible footsteps behind me, too steady, too deliberate to be my own. A cold shiver runs down my spine, and I turn, my heart in my throat. The shadow moves with me, just at the edge of my vision, always there, always waiting. I try to look directly at it, but it shifts away too quickly. The barn is still with me. The force has not let go, and I can't shake the feeling that I never truly left. I never truly escaped. And as I stand frozen in the doorway, the shadow looms closer, just behind me, a constant reminder that the nightmare is far from over. Thank you for making our stories part of your relaxation time. We hope they brought you a sense of peace and transported you to a world of fantasy and mystery. If you enjoyed the stories, feel free to leave us a review. Your feedback inspires us and helps us make the content even better. Now, unwind to the calming sounds of rain and thunderstorms, which will continue to set a tranquil mood. Let these sounds carry you gently into the realm of dreams. Don't forget to like our page if you haven't yet. Wishing you a restful night's sleep. Relax, rest well, and good night.